difficulties, but I'd like to call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. In consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting is being held virtually via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and will be allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that comments are visible to the whole group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record and be conscientious of others trying to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Tonight, we're going to begin with our CDC items, but we will stop at 7:30 and transition to our discussion around hiring, training, accountability, and transparency for the police department. We will then resume our community development meeting after that discussion has concluded. So first off tonight, public comments. This is the time for the public to make comments on any items that are not on our agenda tonight. So again, use the chat feature if anything falls in that category. Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to our public presentations, which are informational only. Our first item, we're starting this evening with the public presentation of the preliminary development plan for Mission Bowl Apartments at 5399 Martway Street. Mr. Scott, will you please provide us with the information on this development?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, great. So we got the PowerPoint presentation fired up and ready to go. Last month, you all approved a pre-development agreement with Mission Bowl Apartment LLC, subsidiary group of Sunflower Development Group. They are interested in building a multifamily housing project on the site of former Mission Bowl bowling out and inter golf course at 539 Martway. 399 Martway, excuse me, the right address here, 5399 Martway. It's kind of a two-phase process. We are currently gathering together our information on the incentive requests they've made for the TIF and the IRB sales tax exemption. Our financial analyst Bruce Kimmel with Ellers has been in discussions with the developer, review pro forma, and ask questions about that. And then in the near future, we'll begin negotiations with them. In the meantime, they've gone ahead and submitted their application for the preliminary development plan. That process, staff has reviewed that and made comments on it and presented a report to the Planning Commission last Monday evening, 24th of August. So with that said, I'm going to stop there and let Kaitlyn Service, our planner, present her staff report to you. As well, just for information purposes this evening, this will be on your agenda on the 16th for your consideration.
Thanks. So for anyone who attended the neighborhood meeting, I know a few council members did, the meeting was on June 15th. This graphic will look a little familiar to you. It outlines the preliminary development process and shows where we are. The city had a neighborhood meeting on June 15th where the applicant presented to the neighbors. Anyone attending had the opportunity to offer comments and ask questions. A preliminary development plan application was submitted by the applicant, after which we mailed notices out to all property owners within 400 feet of the proposal, notifying them of the Planning Commission meeting hearing on August 24th. It was also published in the legal record. The Shawnee Mission Post ran an article about it. It was posted on the city website, social media channels. On June 24th, the Planning Commission had a public hearing, and the public was again able to provide input. The Planning Commission made a recommendation. The vote was 8-0 to the City Council to approve the preliminary development plan with some conditions, which were listed in the staff report, and we'll go over here. So on September 16th, the City Council will have the opportunity to either adopt the Planning Commission's recommendation or override it with a supermajority vote. So if approved, the application will go before the Sustainability Commission to get the recommendations, and those recommendations will be used to develop a final development plan application. So the final development plan is referenced in the staff report just to give us a refresher of the distinction between the preliminary and the final. The preliminary is what we're going to see today. It's really big picture. So, should we allow this apartment building to be built? Does it fit in? With the final development plan, we're going to get into all the more granular details. So, what building materials will be used? What is the exact species of tree that will be planted? So this is why the project will go to the Sustainability Commission between the preliminary and the final, because we want to make sure that the Commission's input will influence the project at that ideal time when the applicant is starting to make those granular decisions about the project. So I say that too, just to kind of, if there are questions today that are like super granular, we might not have all the answers, but more to come, and there's certainly more to review after this. So the applicant has submitted a Mission Bowl apartment proposal. This is a preliminary development plan application to the city proposing construction of a 5-story apartment building on approximately 3.15 acres. So the ground floor uses fronting Martway here will be these live-work units, a lobby, leasing offices, a screened parking garage, and some parks. The proposal aims to kind of create a linear park experience here along the existing Rock Creek Trail by adding trees, landscaping, pedestrian amenities where none currently exist. A small pocket fitness park is proposed up here in the top right corner, along with a small pocket dog park over here on the west side of the property. In addition to the garage parking on the first floor of the proposal, there's the surface parking lot located behind the building. Approximately 164 units are proposed on floors 2 through 5, and there'll be a mix of 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, and studio units. So this is the proposal, the packet of information that the developer submitted to kind of show a conceptual plan of what the building will look like, how the site will be laid out, and that's the primary focus of the staff report and looking to see what they're requesting for the city to approve. The project, it comprises 2 lots near the southeast corner of Knoll Avenue and Martway Street. It's the site of that former Mission Bowl bowling alley and miniature golf course. As most of the community knows, the structure was unfortunately damaged in a fire in 2015, making it unsafe for future use. At the north here, we have the Mission Mart Shopping Center, we have the Ride KC Transit Center, the Security Bank of Kansas City. To the east and the west of the property, there are 2 overflow parking lots. The east is for the Security Bank, the west is for the Peanut and the Mission Mart. And to the south, we have the single-family residences, the Johnson County Wastewater Facility, and the Rock Creek. So additionally, this little box you're seeing here is an existing landlocked cell tower parcel. It's surrounded by the subject property, but it's not included in the proposal in any way. So as the application packet describes, the preliminary development plan has been submitted requesting approval to build a 5-story apartment building containing those approximately 164 units on that 3.15 acre property. The property is studied and the floor plans listed here: comprehensive land use plan, the Rock Creek redevelopment plan, East Gateway redevelopment plan, and the Smart Moves 3.0 regional transit plan. So the comprehensive plan designates the site as future medium density mixed use. This primarily consists of medium density attached residential housing, such as apartment units. Additional uses include live work, offices, and limited retail stores. The plan envisions this to be a really pedestrian friendly area with floor area ratios of 1 to 3. Additionally, the district is intended to serve as a transition zone between low-density residential neighborhoods and areas of higher intensity development. So the proposed project is an apartment building with the live-work spaces, leasing office, and a floor area ratio of 1.05. Multifamily at this location would serve as that transition zone between the existing single-family residences to the south and the higher intensity uses at the Mission Mart Security Bank to the north. So the proposal is an conformance with the intent of the comprehensive plan. Floor area ratios, building off that, they're discussed a lot in the staff report. They'll come up later on as well. So just to dive into that a little bit further to understand why there's such a core tenet of what the comprehensive plan is calling for, the floor area ratio is kind of that relationship between the total amount of usable floor area in a building compared to the total area of the lot on which it sits. So a low ratio indicates kind of auto-oriented design. A higher ratio indicates more pedestrian-oriented design. So for reference, they're the tale of two places where you can buy your gadgets is the Target and Mission, and this is the True Value hardware store on Johnson Drive. The Target has approximately 0.3 floor area ratio. The True Value has a floor area ratio of about 1. Walkable downtowns, healthy transit, transportation choices typically require floor area ratios to be at least 1 to 3, which is what the comprehensive plan calls for. Floor area ratios that are less than 1 are thought to increase auto dependence, compromise walkability, so that floor area ratio of at least 1 is considered ideal for creating those transportation options. So that's kind of why the comprehensive plan emphasizes floor area ratio so heavily, and that will come up later again, so more on that. And back to our 4 master plans, the Rock Creek Redevelopment Master Plan, it envisions, or it notes that the Missionable property, right now it provides a lot of redevelopment opportunities since it's mostly covered by a surface parking lot. The plan emphasizes the need for this strongly defined public realm. So the Rock Creek Trail actually borders the Missionable property on the north side. We had advised the applicant that they needed to create this true linear park experience for pedestrians along this portion of the trail, rather than the feeling of simply walking on that wide sidewalk. These linear park features along the trail, such as landscaping, benches, planters, shade trees, bicycle racks, the pocket parks, they're proposed to align with the city's vision of that activated street. So the building design techniques also aim to create that vibrant pedestrian experience. Along Martway Street, at least 75% of the frontage is devoted to these occupiable live-work spaces. The leasing office, the resident clubhouse amenities. The first floor of this building facade incorporates that large expanse of glass to provide that sense of safety to people walking on the street, just reinforces that pedestrian activity. The first floor patios will kind of serve as those outdoor living rooms. They encourage indirect or direct social interaction, foster that community connectedness. And the proposed building is oriented to Martway Street, built up to the property line. So the parking is sited behind the building in the interior lot, rather than in the front, really to engage that pedestrian. So really with the public realm concept, we're thinking about the experience of someone actually walking along the trail and what would make this a vibrant and exciting experience for them. The plan also emphasizes green infrastructure principles, acknowledging that when that original development paved over that native plant material with concrete, it really increased the flooding potential, put pressure on the city's stormwater infrastructure. So the plan calls for redevelopment that includes less impervious surfaces. This proposed site improvement would decrease the amount of impervious surface by converting about a ½ acre of the current impervious surface into landscaping, recreational open space, such as this linear trail park, and the 2 pocket parks here. So the impact of the reduction of this impervious surface, it's going to reduce stormwater runoff, which reduces flood risk. It decreases water pollution. It decreases the volume of water that the city has to handle in its stormwater infrastructure, so it provides a little bit of relief on that front. The reduction of the impervious surface and, the reduction of that impervious surface and that replacement with actual soil and plant, it will improve the water quality. Additionally, the structural stormwater BMP treatments that are proposed with the development are also engineered to improve stormwater quality. So the third element here associated with the green infrastructure is to make sure that green infrastructure is contributing to a pedestrian-friendly environment. The landscaping, native trees, shrubs, plantings that are proposed for the site, they're a sustainable way to create an aesthetically pleasing pedestrian environment, provide that shade, while also providing those environmental benefits such as reducing heat island effects. For the East Gateway redevelopment plan, it designates the Mission Bowl property as future mixed use. Overall, the plan is calling for higher density mixed use development and urban housing options, pardon me. The Smart Move 3.0 plan is the Kansas City region's long-range transportation plan for transit and mobility. This is a project of Mid-America Regional Council and the agencies that provide transit to Mission residents and employees. So the plan includes recommendations that cities can consider if they want to support healthy transit in their community. The Mission Transit Center right across the street from the proposed development is designated in the plan as a mobility hub. It's kind of this converging point for public transit right now. Mobility hubs are also areas where there's this intensive concentration of living, working, shopping, playing, mostly in the form of mixed-use development. So the plan recommends different elements that will support transit in this area. The plan recommends that development include bicycle parking for residents and employees. The proposed building would include the temporary outdoor bicycle parking, but also that long-term indoor bicycle storage for permanent residents. It also includes a little bicycle repair station for residents. The plan also cautions against including an excessive amount of vehicle parking because the spaces add to the cost of development. They accelerate the depletion of available land. The number of parking spaces that is proposed by the application is exactly the minimum number of parking spaces required by city code. So they do align with that pretty well. The plan also recommends that cities consider density and mixed uses near mobility hubs. It recommends affordable and multi-housing options near mobility hubs. And it recommends that the city kind of consider how well the site integrates with transit, pedestrian, and bicycle access. So right now, the site is near the Mission Transit Center, right along the Rock Creek Trail, near the walkable downtown, so it's pretty well connected to bicycle, pedestrian, and transit facilities. So moving into the zoning code review, the property is in the Main Street 2 district, which is intended to provide development that's consistent with the existing character surrounding the downtown core of Mission. So the district encourages an active streetscape with pedestrian-friendly shopping environment, restricted auto-oriented uses. It also intends to support the businesses in the downtown by encouraging residential and office uses in the area. In general, the zoning code provides regulations on permitted uses, the height, the area, the parking. The application complies with a majority of the conventional zoning code stipulations, and it does request 3 deviations in accordance with the standards for planned zoning districts. So the Main Street 2 district is a planned zoning district. Mission's planned zoning districts, they're meant to encourage innovative, imaginative development. It's meant to support the vision of the community and exceed the quality of projects that would be developed under that conventional zoning. So those planned zoning districts, they do provide flexibility for deviations from the conventional MS2 development standards when the deviation would result in the development of greater quality than a development that conforms to the conventional zoning code, and also result in a development that more closely aligns with the community vision that's been outlined in the city's master plans. The first deviation request is permitted uses. So conventional zoning allows residences that are part of commercial or office building, but because the building's primarily residential, Without traditional office or retail uses, it would require a deviation here. The project narrative included in the staff report, it kind of talks about today's shifting retail and office environment, kind of with the shift to more online sales and everything that's going on with COVID right now. The application really expresses desire to support the existing businesses downtown by providing those people to patronize the businesses rather than provide more commercial uses to compete with those existing businesses. So when evaluating whether the proposed deviation would result in a higher quality project that better aligns with the community plans, we can kind of consider what the plans that we just reviewed tell us, what those 4 master plans are saying about what is quality development at this location. So one goal of the Main Street 2 district is to support the businesses in the downtown area with residential uses. The comprehensive plan envisions that this property will develop into medium density apartments with accessory live-work spaces. The multifamily housing at this location would serve as that transition zone between the existing single-family residences to the south and the higher intensity uses at the Mission Mart and Security Bank to the north. Additionally, the proposed building implements techniques from the Johnson Drive design guidelines to kind of mimic that pedestrian-friendly experience of a mixed-use development. So there's a leasing office and these resident live-work spaces and business center. They're proposed for the ground floor behind that clear glass storefront appearance. So as we spoke with the applicant about the community's desire to have this active, pedestrian-friendly, vibrant street, the live-work units were added to the project. The live-work units, which are shown here with the workspaces on the first floor with kind of the exterior entrance from the Rock Creek Trail, they have a little internal stairway for a resident to have a living quarters up above. It's essentially a single unit. It's consisting of both a workspace and residential space. Both spaces are occupied by the same tenant, which makes it pretty unique. The live-work unit's actually a really old idea. So it's been modernized to meet the needs of entrepreneurs, small businesses, professionals, but in the past, the live-work units were often meaning that a storekeeper was living above their shop. Don't see that too much anymore except for in like old movies, but this is kind of the modern version of that idea. So these are the live-work units. There's approximately 7 live-work units that are fronting on the Rock Creek Trail or Martway that are proposed for the project. The next, I'm seeing a few things in the chat box. I'm just going to quickly check that to make sure everyone can hear me. Oh, okay. So it looks like discussion in the chat box. If anyone can't hear me or anything, please unmute yourself because I won't really be checking those going forward. But the next deviation requested is to allow the building to be 5 stories in height, up to 61 feet in height, and to allow up to 168 units on the property. So again, looking at what the community's plans tell us, that East Gateway plan calls for higher density development and urban housing options. Regional Transit Plan suggests density near the Mission Transit Center to support transit and transportation choices. The Johnson Drive Design Guidelines, they offer techniques to kind of complement the proportion and scale of the surrounding area. So, for example, the proposed building is designed to reduce its perceived height by dividing that building mass into smaller scale components. A lot of different architectural techniques are incorporated into the project to kind of reduce the perceived scale, make it feel to the pedestrian scale, and we can dive into that further if anyone wants to go deeper. The comprehensive plan also envisions that this property would be a transition zone between the higher intensity development to the north and the lower density residential to the south. So in this high intensity area, the security bank is about 95 feet tall. The cell tower is about 160 feet tall, In this transition zone, the proposed building would be about 58 to 61 feet in height. In this lower intensity zone over here, the ground floor of the residences is about 30 feet above the ground floor of the Mission Bowl property, just kind of the nature of having that creek in between the residences and the Mission Bowl property. So you can kind of see the alignment in this image to where the top of the building would align with this two-story house, which is on 60th Terrace. The comprehensive plan also envisions a medium density development with a floor area ratio of 1 to 3. So the application proposes a floor area ratio of 1.05. It's nearly the lowest density floor area ratio that would still conform to the comprehensive plan and still offer those transportation options, offer that walkability, support the transit center that's right across the street. But development on the lower end of this target F.A.R range does have the least potential to be intrusive to the adjacent residences. Additionally, the minimum floor area ratio of 1, if we didn't have that height deviation, it would require the building to cover more of the lot. So this graphic here kind of illustrates that with the ratio of the lot area to the usable floor area of the building. As the building gets taller, it uses up less of the lot. So if we did have a minimum floor area ratio of 1, without that height deviation, it would require the building to cover more of the lot. So this would leave insufficient room for the other site elements, for example, parking. So if the building covers more of the lot, that deviation for parking would likely be necessary in order to achieve that target floor area ratio specified in the comp plan. So the application kind of proposes sufficient parking in exchange for the height deviation. Same concept applies to the proposed parks, the open space, the landscaping. Without that height deviation, these elements would not be included to the extent that they're proposed today. So this would also increase the impervious surfaces with the building. If the building were covering more of the lot, it would have a negative impact on stormwater management, and it would negate some of the environmental benefits that are being proposed today in the application. Additionally, if the building covers more of the lot, it would bring the building closer to the residences, to the floodplain, and to the Rock Creek to the south of the property. So right now, the building is mostly sitting up on Martway. If it were covering more of the lot, it would start getting closer and closer to the residences, closer to floodplain, closer to Rock Creek. So the Main Street 2 zoning, the application does show preliminary compliance with most of the sections of the code. Won't go into every single item here. It is included in the staff report, but these are some of the things that is still complying with, and then just requesting those deviations as noted. Trent System Engineering, they completed a traffic study on behalf of the applicant. Traffic engineers from GBA reviewed the traffic impact study on behalf of the city. The purpose of the traffic impact study was to kind of assess the impact of the proposed development on the surrounding transportation system. All the intersections are projected to operate at an acceptable level of service. No capacity improvements are really needed to mitigate any development traffic to the street network. It also notes that, the GBA report also notes that in some instances, the residential development here that's proposed would create less traffic demand than that former bowling alley and miniature golf course, particularly on evenings and weekends. The applicant also provided an engineer-created stormwater report, which was also reviewed by engineers on behalf of the city. It was concluded that the proposed improvements will reduce the impervious area on the site. Consequently, that peak runoff from the site will be reduced. They determined that a waiver of detention requirements is appropriate since no impervious surfaces are additionally proposed. There are stormwater best management practices, BMP treatments that are proposed to be incorporated into the site improvements, and a level of service of about 1.9 is proposed for the site. And then also recommends that installation of private storm systems would route stormwater through the site. So some elements of the stormwater report will be addressed later in the final development plan application. Overall, based on the findings of these studies, the consistency with the city's master plans, and the intent of the city code, staff did recommend to the Planning Commission that they forward this application on to the City Council with a recommendation of approval with the conditions listed in the staff report. And the Planning Commission did vote 8-0 to do that.
Kaitlyn, does that conclude your presentation?
It does, thank you.
All right, it did look like to start us off, we had a couple of comments in the chat box. Debbie, do you want to give your comment and then we'll let Finn give his? Or do you want me to read it? Oh, you're muted.
Whatever you prefer, Sollie. I spent 2 hours with the developer by phone going over some of the things that I thought were very favorable, which were the amenities, the sustainability features. I still have some concerns about the structure, the style of the building architecturally. To me, it looks like a box. And I'm not trying to be offensive. It's just, I've had comments to that effect from constituents too. It looks kind of like a box. And I don't know, some of the other things are great amenities. I love the potential dog park. I love some of the trees, and the sustainability features are right on target. I just have some concrete concerns about the way the building looks. That's it.
All right, and then I think we had a slightly different take from Ben. I don't know if you want to give your comment.
Sure, yeah, I'll be brief. I do like the looks of the building as it's proposed quite a bit, and I think it's gone through a couple of revisions that have improved it even further. I think it looks unique among a lot of the modern urban apartment buildings that are going up. But that's a matter of taste, and I think everybody's going to have a different opinion on it. So I'll leave the aesthetics at that. I do want to note that I live right behind the proposed site, the Mission Bowl site. It's very visible from our yard, and we're happy to see this kind of development going up. This is why my wife and I moved to this area, and it's an exciting development. I love to see the density and the idea of residents moving in and shopping at our shops and businesses, and hopefully making it possible to open up some more of those for rent storefronts and things, and keep Johnson Drive going. I also want to point out that if you didn't see it in the elevation drawing, there's a very big drop off behind our homes related to the Rock Creek channel. So that sort of in contrast to the Martway mixed use plan from a couple of years ago, the 61 feet is really heavily sort of adjusted downwards, because we have a pretty big, I almost call it a cliff. You couldn't climb it, by foot, and it's pretty deep. So that helps a lot. And I know the developers put a lot of efforts into privacy screenings and things. So we're happy to see it in our backyard, and hope that the council and everybody will support it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I think that wraps up our chat box comments. Do we have comments or questions from anyone else on council at this time? And I can't see everyone, so if I don't call on you, go ahead and jump in.
Sollie, this is Ken Davis.
Yeah. Yes, Ken?
I had a couple of questions with regards to the illustrations that accompanied this. One of the illustrations indicates the trees along the south side of the creek. And I don't know, that's not part of their property. I do know that the creek project and the channeling is going on right now. A lot of trees have been removed. And so I guess my question might actually be to Celia Duran, and whether those trees are going to be replaced at all after the creek project is done, to offer screening for those homes that has been removed.
So this came up in the design process, and we're replacing the trees back on the townhome property close to their parking lot. But farther west on the creek, The decision was made not to put in the trees because if we put in the trees, eventually we're going to have the same issue where they're on the slope and they start to cause erosion, or they get large enough that, you know, the roots could cause us to have to get into the wall again. So we did make that decision. Now, we tried to save as many trees in the backyards as we could, but within the easements, we weren't planning to install the trees back.
I know that there were some comments that were made during the Planning Commission meeting about the screening and concern about light pollution and so forth. I didn't know if there was any option for even bushes or something like that that could offer some additional screening rather than trees.
They're not included right now. I mean, we could have further discussion about that. The landscaping probably won't go in till, you know, the spring of next year. So that we could have some discussion about that. What we don't want to do is put, you know, bushes obviously wouldn't be an issue, but put anything back in that would cause an issue in the future, well into the future.
Okay.
And Kaitlyn, there are some elements in the plan itself, right, on screening and the way the lighting is constructed. Is that right?
Yes. So, I mean, typically where an apartment complex like this would share a property line with a residential development, it would be required that a 6-foot fence would be built and there would be like evergreen trees there. However, because there's that 30-foot drop off between the residences and the proposed apartment complex, the screening that was proposed by the developer was actually to provide covered parking at the back of the lot, so that if someone in their backyard does end up looking down, they wouldn't see the parked cars so near. There's also vegetative elements included in that covered parking to kind of enhance the screening, soften it up a little bit. Additionally, for the comments about the lighting, in that final development plan application, the applicant will be required to submit an engineer photometric plan. So that's going to show you the style of all the lighting, the height, all the different elements, and it's going to show you the foot candle power onto all the site, making sure that it's directed away from the residences. It's a highly controllable feature of the development. There's nothing that, you know, can't be adjusted to make sure that the lighting doesn't disturb the residences across the creek.
Kaitlyn, I have one more question for you, and this is kind of looking forward at our comprehensive plan in the future. It seems that these areas that are border neighborhoods, we've had plans before where the height issue has been brought up. And my question to you is, as you consider our future comprehensive plan, I'd be curious to know if the form-based code needs to be modified and some of the restrictions that we're currently having to create deviations might be reconsidered for the locations that are next to neighborhoods versus downtown. And so I just bring that up as a topic to be considered. And I know that Debbie Kring is on the comprehensive planning group, and I'd like to see some of those elements kind of brought forward from past experience. Thank you.
Yeah, Ken, I'm also on that steering committee, and I know those are part of the plan discussions, in particular the form-based code, though noting that this isn't within the form-based code, but that is on the list of things that I think the steering committee will be looking at.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hillary?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo some of Councilmember Crane's concerns about the looks of the building. While I like the general design, I'm not crazy about the color scheme. And so I guess my question would be, Kaitlyn, is there room in the process between this agreement and the final development agreement for color schemes to be looked at a little bit more?
Yeah, so the drawings that you're seeing in the staff packet and that I shared on the screen earlier, they are conceptual building elevations, conceptual drawings. So there is room. Hearing this feedback, and I'll certainly share this with the developer and the applicant and the architect working on the project. There is room for them to adjust that and make sure that it fits into the area aesthetically and makes everyone kind of proud to see it in the community. So I'll definitely share that with them.
Yeah, and I would kind of second Hillary's comments, and I've already told the developer this too, that I like the design, but the color choice would not be my first choice, though. As Ben said, some of that's a taste issue, and everyone's going to have, you know, their palette preference. Understand that as well. All right, any other comments, questions, concerns? If not, we'll conclude this presentation. All right. Seeing none, thank you, Kaitlyn. And we'll move on. I guess I'll ask Laura, should we go ahead and start our second public presentation? Given that we're 12 minutes out from our cutover.
Yeah, I would be hesitant to do that because I know we're going to be longer than 12 minutes into this next presentation. I don't know if there's anyone who's on the call now specifically for the presentation at the start of the next meeting. You know, what we might do is go ahead and pause the CDC meeting and open up the, I also don't have my presenters back yet from the police department, who will be here in just a few minutes. But if we wanted to go ahead and open up the Finance and Administration Committee meeting and take action, excuse me, on the one action item that we do have, which is the acceptance of the minutes, that would probably get us closer to that 7:30 start time, and then we could flip over to that presentation.
Sure. Should we do the CDC minutes first or jump straight to the cutover?
No, I think you could go ahead and do the CDC minutes first. It's a little bit of
a little bit of a jump around. Yeah, so we'll start our action items. We have one action item on our CDC agenda. That is acceptance of the August 5th, 2020 Community Development Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so presented here are the minutes from the August 5th, 2020 Community Development Committee for the committee's review and consideration. Thank you.
Recommend acceptance.
Second.
All right, sounds good. And with that, I guess we'll call it a pause. We will pause our CDC committee meeting and cut over to Finance and Administration.
Thank you, Sollie. It's 7:20, and I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. Again, in consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting will be held virtually via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and will be allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that these comments are visible to the entire group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record and be conscientious of others trying to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Before we move into the public presentation, I would like to consider our only action item, which is acceptance of the August 5th, 2020 Finance and Administration Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Again, these are the Finance and Administration Committee meeting minutes from August 5th of 2020 for the committee's review and consideration. Thank you very much.
Recommend acceptance.
I move that we consider the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we move forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think usually we don't vote. We just sort of put them forward unless there's any issue, right?
Sure. Okay. The public presentation we have this evening is step 2 in our Racial Equality Action Plan. And I'd like to turn this over to Laura Smith and our police department representatives to share information on the department's hiring, training, accountability, and transparency issues.
Thank you, Councilmember Kring. We'll give just a moment to get our presentation loaded here for everyone's benefit. We did upload that to the packet late this afternoon, so it is available to the public and anyone else who would want to follow along. As Councilmember Kring referenced, this is step 2 in our action plan, and as we, I think I'm going to go to the next agenda. So thank you all for being, excuse me, for being here with us this evening. I don't know, we've got, sorry. Are we good? Okay. Get all of us operators coordinated here. Anyway, joining me this evening will be Captain Kirk Lane, our patrol commander, and our interim chief of police, Dan Madden, who gave the presentation last week. So they'll be handling the lion's share of this evening's presentation as well. As we talked about at our August 26th meeting last week, these first 2 sessions are very information heavy, and we feel like it is very important for us to just take the opportunity to go through this, and we appreciated your patience last week. Hope you will indulge us this week in sharing this information, because we really feel like this sets the foundation for our ongoing conversations and dialogue around many of these issues. So it's the place where we start. Last week we talked a lot about policies, and particularly policies related to use of force, and we shared some statistics and demographics. In just a moment, you'll see a slide which I've created kind of a parking lot. Last week we talked about creating a parking lot for issues that were raised either by council members or members of the public, so that we make sure that we're tracking and not losing sight of any of the issues that we want to follow up and discuss. So some of these issues we'll touch on that were raised in questions that came out of last week's session. We'll touch on this evening. Others we will weave into our ongoing discussion. So if we don't get to it tonight and you don't see it on the parking lot, make sure you let me know because we want to keep that list current, and it will be ongoing. So again, as I mentioned, our goal this evening is really to just share some information around our hiring practices, training requirements, various accountability systems, both internal to and specific to the City of Mission, those that exist at the district attorney's level and the state level, that address issues of accountability in particular. And then we'll give kind of a brief summary of Citizen Advisory Board options and some of the other local jurisdictions here in Johnson County. And I didn't add to this agenda, but one of the things that we added to our presentation late today was just to share with you. I think we realized after last week's presentation that perhaps we didn't do a good job of sharing some of the reflection that we've done internally over the last several months and some of the things that we're already working on or thinking about making modifications to. So we'll share some data on that and then talk about potential next steps for what will be a much more of an open dialogue and exchange as we head into October. So with that, these were the issues that I have added to the parking lot that, again, as I mentioned, we'll maintain for additional conversation and discussion. And these came to me through a variety of sources. I had some emails from community members that were on the call last week, some from council, some that we've generated internally. So a more in-depth review and understanding of the racial demographic statistics when compared to the census data. We touched briefly on the fact that it wasn't an apples-to-apples match, but I think we need to give some more thought and analysis around where those differences may be occurring and how we address those going forward. We had some questions about the Fraternal Order of Police, specifically sort of membership for officers in our department, legal services provided, participation in disciplinary action. The Fraternal Order of Police is just that, it is a fraternal organization. Our officers have the option to pay dues into that organization through a payroll deduction, but it is not a organized or recognized bargaining unit of any type that is involved formally in salary, benefits, disciplinary actions of that type. And again, I think this is one we're collecting some additional information on some of these other questions around legal services provided, and we'll touch, I know, specifically this evening on the opportunity for participation in disciplinary actions or internal investigations. We received some feedback as we walked through the 8 Can't Wait initiative and our responses to that, asking for potentially looking at more explicit prohibition of chokeholds and strangleholds in our policy language. We have some questions around budget allocation for department training, and you'll see this evening, we don't track from a budgetary dollar standpoint. You'll see some information presented later in terms of hours by subject area, and we'll explain why sometimes it's difficult to track the dollars associated with that. We had some questions around the potential for stricter standards in our standards of conduct policy. That was one of the policies that we touched on last week regarding hate speech, both on or off duty, and failure to intervene. A discussion of mutual aid response, both for those agencies who assist us and at the times when we might be assisting other agencies. We had a specific question about whether or not the Mission Police Department has riot gear. I believe Captain Lane answered that last week, and the answer is no, we do not currently have riot gear that is available to our department. And then some questions about taking a kind of a deeper dive or a deeper look into how our department policies interact with social media usage for the officers or other out of uniform conduct. So again, I think I have captured most of what I have heard over the last couple of months and following our meeting last week, but if I have missed anything, please feel free to email or submit something in the chat box, and we'll keep this parking lot kind of front and center as we move through this conversation. So with that, I think we're going to start with Captain Lane this evening, who's going to share with us sort of an overview of the hiring process for a police officer.
Thank you, Laura. Evening, Council, Mayor. So yeah, we'll start out with the hiring process, and you'll see on the first slide here, there is some law that requires for minimum qualifications before you're a police officer. And I'll just kind of skim through these. If there's questions, we can talk about it. But United States citizen, 21 years old, high school diploma or equivalent, good moral character, free of physical or mental conditions that can impact the ability to perform duties of a police officer. Submit fingerprints to be searched nationally, psychological testing, no felony convictions, domestic violence convictions, or misdemeanor convictions for crimes that impact integrity. So these are all things that everybody, every department, every agency is mandated to go with and to adhere to. So our process, and every department's can be different, but ours are going to look pretty similar to the rest of the ones here in the Johnson County area. First, we'll get a resume that will be sent to me, the captain of patrol, and then I put together an oral board which consists of myself, a sergeant, an officer, and a detective. We then do a written and physical test. The physical test is put together a standardized test up at Johnson County Community College. There are a majority of agencies that all went in on this standardized test for recruits to be able to pass the physical agility test.
At that point, if everything still looks good, they'll go to a chief of police interview. That's where the chief can have the opportunity to discuss, kind of their beliefs about police work and make sure that what their beliefs line up with the organizational goals. And at that point, if the chief of police is still interested in the candidate, a conditional offer of employment is given. And the reason a conditional offer of employment has to be given is because during the background investigation process, we dig into things that are otherwise protected. So medical issues, psychological issues, any addiction type issues, all those things that are typically protected in employment law, we have to dive into during the background investigation process to make sure that we're getting, well-qualified applicants that aren't going to do a bad job for us. At that point, they're given a 36-page application and background history. So during that, we're asking for everything, every address they've lived for years, neighbors information, school information. We check if they're prior military, we check their DD-214 to make sure that they're eligible for carrying a gun, because some circumstances, if you get kicked out of the military, then you can't carry a gun, which disqualifies you from being able to be a police officer. We asked about drug history and criminal history, traffic history, all those things that we need to look at and verify, but also know about as we're deciding who it is we want to be protecting our citizens. During this process, we're also setting up a pre-employment medical examination and pre-employment psychological evaluation. As Captain Lane said, a psychological evaluation is a requirement of the state that we do. Now, that comes in all forms. When I was hired 21 years ago, I sat in an office and filled out a little bubble sheet with Scantron, the old test-taking thing. That was my psychological evaluation. At this point, we send our officers or prospective officers to a forensic psychologist that specializes in first responders. They do a thorough testing and interviewing process that takes the better part of a day. They are able to give us, and quite accurately, a good picture of who we'd be getting should we hire this person. There have been some that we've parted ways with in the past that we go back and look at those pre-employment psychological evaluations and realize just how kind of spot on they are. So a lot of confidence on those as we develop that relationship with the psychologist. They are also, the medical examination consists of just the typical physical evaluation, but it also includes the requirements for the position. So you need all the physical requirements of pushing and pulling and lifting and those things. At that point, we also ask them to take a computerized voice stress analysis. What that is it's similar to what you would consider to be a polygraph or a lie detector. But it fits our needs here in our department better. It's simply attaching a microphone to somebody and asking them a series of questions. Those questions can be formatted based upon what you've learned in your background investigation. And what we tell them is it's not something we're trying to get somebody out of the process when we're hiring somebody. It's just a verification that gives us some comfort that the information that they've given us and their background and their history is accurate. So if you've gone through and you've passed all of those things, then at that point you're given a bona fide offer of employment. That's when you're given a start date, salary information, and those things. So if we are absolutely screaming through this process, the minimum amount of time it's going to take is 6 weeks. And, in a background investigation, it's done by a detective. So some of that, depending on the detective's caseload, on what's going on, and what cases they have, kind of dictates how long a background investigation can take. So 6 weeks we'd be pretty happy with, but that's probably the bare minimum start to finish.
So it doesn't stop there. The training process, once that person is selected or hired. So if they don't have any prior experience, they would have to go to the Johnson County Regional Police Academy. And there's also KLATC, which is the state academy located in Hutchinson, Kansas. Johnson County is a recognized satellite academy, and that's where we send folks because it's closer, but they still have to adhere to the state mandated rules that we go by. So that is 18 weeks is the academy right now. While they're there, this includes all their legal training, physical training, medical, firearms, evidence, defensive tactics, de-escalation, and their driving training. And if it's still set up the same way, I think the first 2 weeks is all legal. That's all the legal updates. And as you go through the process, there are benchmarks that you have to pass each test to continue on through in the academy. So they work on the de-escalation, verbal communications, crisis intervention, interacting with special populations, stress management, and MOCSA. So when they complete the academy and successfully complete the academy, then they come in, and this is for a non-certified or non-experienced officer, then we proceed into our field training, and that's a minimum of 12 weeks. So once we get them from the academy and they're fresh out and they should know everything, then they got 12 weeks to work in our city. And it's a really crucial time for us not to only see, okay, well, they may have passed the academy, but are they going to pass our internal tests of the way we operate, our culture, the way we do things? And when you're riding with someone for that long, you really get to know them, because it's not an option that you just don't get to do that. So they're evaluated on a daily basis. They rotate through different field training officers, so they have different people to go through and test through these phases. And at any time, that officer can be extended in the phase or can be terminated from the program at that point. The only difference is if we have a certified officer, is the minimum requirement 7 weeks for them to attend the training. So a certified officer come over here with experience, already attended the academy, and whether they've been a cop for 10 years or 2 months, they're still going to go through the 7 weeks at a minimum. And if we feel like they need to be extended, we will extend them too and get them down the road a little bit further. Just because you're an officer at one agency does not necessarily mean that it's easy transferable right over. Law is law, but each city operates a little bit differently. So once they become a police officer, they're required by the state to attend 40 hours of training annually. Our training year runs from July 1st to June 30th every year. And obviously this year, COVID-19 had a lot of impact on our training. Just like everybody else, we went out for training for some things. With COVID, there was a lot of virtual training, and the state actually changed their requirements in allowing us to get more training hours virtually than what we normally would. And I believe that's about 20 hours is what they usually average. Racial or other bias-based training is required annually. Training reported to Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center by specified categories. So the state has broke down the certain categories that you can maximize your amount of training in those particular categories. You can only get X amount of hours, whether it's instructor hours or video hours. Some training has to be in person. And then there's an annual firearms qualification that is also required annually to keep your certification. So here's another little snapshot. 2018 to 2019, pre-COVID, we had about 2,967.5 total hours training throughout the whole police department. That averaged out to about 102 hours of training per officer. So let me clarify that a little bit. Some of our officers may have went to an instructor school. So that's going to be maybe a week or 2 week long school. But those hours are also brought back and instructed in-house to our officers that are working in-house too. And this is kind of a breakdown of some of the categories, or the categories that we broke down. I'd like to point out one point, and that's our leading training and mental health and wellness. That wasn't something that was tracked before. It was something that we decided we need to start tracking, and once that we got assigned a co-responder, the mental health training and the national stage started trending to having co-responders with your department. And again, we have all but 4 officers of our agency trained in co-responder training, and we also have a co-responder assigned to us from Johnson County Mental Health. So we did attend a lot of training with that, and like I said, she's in-house, so she comes to us and also does in-house training with us on certain topics or hot button issues that we need to be made aware of. But the training hours range all over, and when I say we have defensive tactics training, again, that is something that would fall in when we have our defensive tactics training. De-escalation is part of defensive tactics. We have that training in there. Supervisor training, we have officers going when the COVID gives us a break. We're going to head into some de-escalation instructor school training that we have 2 officers scheduled to go to that as well. So we try to gauge our training around, again, the hot topics that we need to be attending and pay attention to, and it's trending in law enforcement. But there are also some staple training that we need to have every year to keep our officers safe.
And that kind of goes back to the question about what the dollars we spend allocated to these different types of training. Is if we have an in-house trainer, we're not spending those dollars because it's just part of their duty. You know, there might be overtime associated with the training to make sure that, you know, the officers still covering the street. So I would just find it more effective to cover the training hours by topic as opposed to a dollar number attached.
And before we move on to the next slide, I see Councilmember Davis has asked, what are the requirements for continued employment, for example, criminal history, physical examinations, and medical status? And I'll start with that. So those would all be handled through our regular standards of conduct policy within the department and then the broader personnel guidelines and policies of the overall city. We do run motor vehicle checks actually for all of our employees on an annual basis. So we have the opportunity to see if there's anything that would pop up there. In terms of physical examinations, I don't think you all have ongoing, you have some firearms training. I don't think you have physical standards specifically. There are some things that we talk about through our work comp provider, you know, and trying to encourage that physical fitness and physical agility. And obviously, if we have issues that impact an employee's ability to perform their job, and this extends well beyond the police department. This is for any city employee. We would have those reviewed and then would look at our ability to accommodate any limitations or accommodations that might need to be made surrounding those issues. I don't know if you all have anything to add.
Yeah, that's all accurate. And the other thing that we do is a fitness for duty test and make sure that the officer, if they were injured or there was some kind of possibility they may not be able to perform the job description, the job duty, we send them to get tested to do all that. And again, be able to be safe on the street and keep our officers safe and our citizens safe if they're out there doing the job. And that's up to the officer to self-report, the supervisors to notice too as well if there's issues that we're seeing, then we'll address those immediately.
All right. And now we're going to get into the police accountability and transparency. Accountability comes in a lot of different forms. For us, it oftentimes is referred to IA or internal affairs. I've handled the internal affairs investigations for the department for almost 10 years now. Through that process, it's developed quite a bit. Also, lessons learned through this that we'll discuss later. So in general, we will accept a complaint in any form. We will accept it in writing. You can call us if you want to talk to us, but you don't feel comfortable coming to the police station. I have met people at a place that they're comfortable. We try to make sure that whatever the issue is, we can resolve it, make sure that we understand the issue, make sure we have good contact information. And that's why in parentheses, in writing is preferred. If we just get an email that doesn't have any other contact information other than an email address, it doesn't give us the best chance to truly understand the complaint, if we have questions about what the complaint is exactly. We want to make sure that we can contact them and interview them.
I think you might be muted.
Dan, you're muted. Can you take it off mute, please? Dan, could you take it off mute, please?
I think they're using a central speaker.
Yeah,
that they have to speak.
City staff are all muted, so.
I think it's the audio bridge that's the problem.
Okay.
So hang up the call? Hang up. All right. Sorry about that. We were using a conference call phone so we could all be on the same. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, much better.
They can't hear him.
You can hear me good? Okay.
We've lost the presentation screen though for now.
Everything just went haywire on us. Yes.
You good?
Yes. All right. And I guess I should back up a little bit in this, and I don't know where I dropped off, but internal affairs is one of the very most important things a police department can do. We have to police the police. It is important that we hold accountable our officers for things they do, both good and bad. We're an organization of human beings. There are going to be mistakes at times, but that's why we train. That's why we do all the things we do to make sure we're getting the best people we can. So through that, our policy also requires all officers to report any misconduct that they see. So if you observe somebody using excessive force, you're required to report that. If a person that the excessive force was used against makes the complaint, and I go and investigate that and learn that another officer was just standing around, saw it and didn't say anything, that person's going to be held to account as well. So it is it's an integral part of the organization, because it is, we can't function as a good police department without the trust of the citizens. So that's why we focus a lot of attention on background investigation, training, and thorough thorough internal affairs investigations when we do those. Yes. So there are kind of three different types of complaint classifications. You got the informal, that's when you get somebody who calls the sergeant that's working that says, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but the officer was kind of rude. So at that point, the field sergeant would kind of do that investigation and see what the nature of it was, and they can either handle it on that end, on their end, if it deserves just a counseling, a note in the file, things like that. People can also file formal complaints, and that's where I come in and do the full-blown investigation, and make findings and present reports and things like that. There's also an incomplete investigation, and sometimes what happens is somebody will file a complaint and then they vanish. That kind of comes back to when we want to make sure we're getting good contact information for people, or sometimes they just decide they no longer want to cooperate with the investigation. So that's what an incomplete investigation would be. And in actuality, these three are new to the policy in Lexipol as far as the classifications of complaints. So we've never really had technically an incomplete investigation for quite some time. So when you talk about the investigation itself, it is very similar to a criminal investigation. The only advantage you have is that you don't have to go very far to find the people that you need to interview, because they're going to be in the building here shortly. So that's one of the things that makes it a little bit easier to handle. It's important to remember that just like any other citizen, employee has rights. Now, with those rights, there are some safeguards that we can use to make sure that we get reliable information. One such thing is what's referred to as garrity. And garrity is a case, it's case law that allows us to compel statements from an employee that may have other rights to non-self-incrimination, but then if they give you a statement after you've ordered them, you're compelling them as a condition of their employment to answer questions about an incident, then those statements that they give you under garrity cannot be used in any criminal proceedings. Now, there are some stipulations to where they can be used in civil rights lawsuits and things like that. But in order for us to make sure we're getting information, we sometimes read garrity. Sometimes it's not always necessary because it's rarely a criminal issue, but sometimes due to the nature or sensitivity of an investigation, I will go ahead and read it, especially when you're interviewing other officers that or sometimes they don't want to talk about it, but if you're compelling them as a condition of their employment, then they have to go ahead and tell you and give you truthful answers. During a disciplinary interview, an officer can have a representative in the room. Now that representative can be of their choice, but those representatives can't necessarily interfere with the interview process. And also the policy requires that all employees provide truthful answers to any questions that they're asked in an internal affairs interview. So there are different ways we dispose of or we find on personnel complaints. The first on the list is unfounded. It means, the person made a complaint, but there's really, when after review and investigation, it either did not occur altogether, or you find it didn't occur in the city. Maybe it, in all actuality, was another police department that they thought was mission, which occurs regularly on any number of topics that we deal with. Exonerated, mean that what they're complaining about did occur, but it was lawful. Somebody may say that you used excessive force, but as you go through the investigation, you realize that it was justified, lawful, and proper. Not sustained means there's just insufficient evidence. It's kind of like a hung jury, I guess. The burden of proof in a internal affairs investigation is just probable cause, but sometimes that's difficult to obtain, whether it be just lack of evidence or information available. And then sustained, which would kind of be equivalent to guilty. You find that the act did occur and it did in fact constitute misconduct or policy violations. So administrative leave, I know that tends to be a kind of a hot button issue. When you hear about officer involved shootings, people are curious to know why an officer is off, getting paid after they just did this, or whatever the case may be. We use administrative leave for any number of things. A lot of times, if we have somebody that's being alleged to have committed a serious policy violation, something that brings their integrity into question, if we have a decent enough reason to believe that actually did occur or possibly even occurred, we might put somebody on administrative leave because we don't want them on the street. We don't want to take the chance that this did occur, and then we're jeopardizing all of our other officers' integrity and by leaving somebody on the street when we're investigating them for something. So that is often used in those situations. And like I said, what you often hear about it involved with is officer involved shootings. Now, it's, in Kansas, our law is a little bit more strange than other cities to where, or other states, I guess. Our self-defense law for a private citizen and the use of force laws for law enforcement officers are very similar. So, but we're technically, we're charged with enforcing the law, and there's statute that gives us the authority to use deadly force if necessary. So since we're given that authority, we have to afford our employee the due process of going through the investigation before we make those findings. Now, at any point in that investigation, if everything's looking like it's going down a bad road, administrative leave can go from regular administrative leave with pay to administrative leave without pay. And that has occurred in the past, but it's very rare that anything that serious occurs. But so it's just important for the due process of the officers that they get, if they're put on administrative leave, it's not because we believe them or don't believe them, or it's just a necessary step for due process. When you talk about criminal investigations, internal affairs, you have to run separate investigations. I cannot be the investigator of the internal affairs complaint as well as the crime that's alleged. So those two have to be separate. They can run parallel and you can do a lot of the same things at the same time, but they have to be separate in how they are handled.
stop there. So Councilmember Davis has a question. Do internal investigations ever include independent parties or other city or police representatives from other cities?
So there have been incidents in the past. It's not a matter of process or policy at this point, but through professional organizations that I belong to, involving internal affairs investigators, you know, I've taken some of the ones that you know, you're just kind of, you're unsure of which way to go. What, you know, what would you do? You asked your peers in other agencies kind of what they think about it, to try to get an idea of if they've had anything similar in the past and what they kind of thought about the circumstances. Obviously, we leave names out of it just for personnel reasons, but you know, just kind of give the facts of the incident and just kind of bounce ideas off of other people that go through the same process with internal affairs investigations. So when you look at our internal affairs statistics, we kind of broke them down into different categories. So we have, in 2017 was a very strange year where we did not have any complaints against officers made. That, I have no explanation for it, but we just received 0 complaints that year. So when you look at 2018, we broke them down in administrative. And those are going to be just your typical, any workplace type rules. You know, you got to be at work on time. You know, you got to follow the policies, you know, just the general workplace policies. And then an important aspect of what we do is, and I mentioned this last week too, is we hold our officers accountable for what they do off duty as well. You know, so if they're involved in an incident involving a police department, or, you know, they get a DUI or anything like that, we hold them accountable because they're putting our agency name and the reputation on the line as well as their own as an officer. So that's another category. And then on-duty conduct, there's kind of 2 categories. One is just, you know, just the officer was rude, or, you know, they raised their voice or cussed at me or something like that. And then there's the on-duty conduct that involves kind of more of the severe abuse of authority, failure to take action, you know, unlawful actions along those lines. And then, of course, we keep track of the bias-based statistics, not just for us, but also for the state. Excessive use of force complaints, and then use of force review. And that's when we use deadly force or injure somebody severely in the course of duty. So in 2018, we had 7 complaints total. 2 of those were, I mean, I guess I don't need to read the chart to you, but just kind of, that gives you an idea of where we're at with those numbers for the last several years. And those are the same years, did 2017 through 2020 year to date, because those are the same years that we provided use of force data for last week. So then when you look at the disposition of complaint, that goes back to the sustained, you know, guilty, not guilty, unfounded, or exonerated. And like I said, the language has changed somewhat, but so in those 3 years or 3.5 years, 47.1% of our internal affairs investigations have been sustained. So, you know, we take these seriously. We look at all different aspects of it, look and see if our policy is violated, and then make the determination. And I think 47.1% sustained is a fairly high number as internal affairs percentages go. So that is one statistic. Next, on the next slide, the complaint origin is something that, you know, I don't want to use the word proud, but I think it says something about the character of our agency. You know, there's often associated, you know, negative connotation to the thin blue line or the blue wall or whatever, you know, people want to say. But for our agency, 41.2% of all complaints filed against officers are filed from within the police department. So other officers or supervisors holding other officers and supervisors accountable for their actions, because it's that important to us. So 52.9% be external complaints. So then we, you know, wanted to make sure I broke down the disposition of those two different categories as well. So when you look at our external complaints between those 3.5 years, 33.3% of external complaints were sustained. 22.2 were not sustained. 33.3% were unfounded, and 11.1% exonerated. And then when you look at our internal complaints, 87.5% of all of the internal complaints are found sustained. And it's because there's always, generally always sufficient evidence, documentation to sustain a violation of policy. And most of those are just those minor workplace policies, but you know, we do also get the more serious complaints that come from within the department as well. Now I'm kind of getting kind of the checks and balances and safeguards, because that's another important part of our job. As Captain Lane was talking to you earlier about hiring process, and I was telling you about the background process. Several years ago, Kansas legislature enacted a law that required law enforcement agencies to open their books for other law enforcement agencies doing a pre-employment background investigation. So in the past, what you heard about was people, you know, agencies getting rid of somebody or giving them good recommendations just to get rid of them. So law was passed that requires us that if another agency contacts us and they have the appropriate waiver from the applicant, and they were previously worked for us, we have to open their entire personnel file and also have to open up all of their any and all internal affairs investigations complaints that they were involved with, whether or not they were sustained or not sustained or whatever the case may be. So we have to provide those. Now, we do this every time we hire somebody. If we know somebody was a law enforcement officer in another jurisdiction, we absolutely are taking this waiver to those police agencies and having them open the books. Now, we don't control what other agencies do to their hiring specifications. So if one of our officers that we decided to part ways with goes to apply for another police department, we can't, you know, we probably, one, won't know about it, but two, if they don't contact us and ask us for those records, that's, you know, that's kind of on them. That's their issue that they need to go through. But we do everything we can on our end to, one, comply with those reporting requirements and also open our books for anybody that wants to do a background investigation on a previous employee. And that kind of goes into Kansas CPOST, and CPOST is the Commission on Police Officer or Peace Officers Standards and Training. Anytime that we part ways with somebody, regardless of circumstance, we have to submit a change of status form to CPOST within those 30 days. We have complete immunity for what we put on that. So we have to be honest with those forms. There are several things that go into it. When we submit those forms to the state, and it's essentially anything other than they left or retired on their own free will, we're going to get a call from one of the investigators at C-Post. C-Post, we have to give them all records associated with any internal affairs investigations, and we're required to do that. So when Captain Lane read those requirements for a police officer position at the beginning of the presentation, that comes from C-Post. C-Post grants us our commission as a law enforcement officer. They grant it, and therefore they can also take it away. So their investigation process, they request our reports. We're required to submit it to them. We're always an open book with them because it is important that if we have a bad officer, that they don't continue to move around from one agency to another. So C-Post can take any number of actions on somebody's certification. They can suspend a certification or revoke or issue a censure. All of those certification actions are public record. So if anybody wants to look at the Kansas C-Post website, they can look and see just how many officers are losing their certifications and where they're from and all those things. That's all public record as far as if their status. Now, what isn't public record are the sheets that we turn in. There are portions of the change of status form that are public record and portions that are not open for public record. So not just anyone can go in and see what it is that somebody left the agency for. They can only see basic identifying information and what agency they worked for and things like that.
There's a question in the chat. Does the legislation requiring law enforcement agencies to open personnel files also apply to other states?
So the question was whether the Kansas law applies to other states. It doesn't apply if we go to another state to do a background investigation, but it does apply if an agency from another state comes to us to do a background investigation. But generally speaking, I think this is becoming more and more widespread. And as part of our application packet, there are several waivers that we have our applicants sign. That way, if an agency demands an original, we have several original copies to give to those agencies. And we've, generally speaking, had pretty good luck in getting the information that we need. Another check and balance is at the district attorney's office. And it's technically not just at the district attorney's office, this is technically with every prosecutor. There are two case laws that are similar in nature, and what we refer to as Brady Giglio information. So as we've kind of harped on for the last couple of Wednesdays, integrity is very important to us here and should be with every law enforcement officer in this country. If you do something that impacts your integrity, if we find that you lie to us about something, that constitutes Brady Giglio information. After we've determined that you have lied, we have to submit our information to the district attorney. They then make a determination of whether it is in fact Brady Giglio information. If the district attorney's office says, yes, this is, Brady, we're gonna have to put them on the Brady Giglio list, That means every single case that that officer testifies in, the district attorney's office has to disclose to the defense attorney that they have this information. It essentially ruins your reputation and your veracity to tell the truth in a court of law. We don't have room for that in a department the size of Mission. We don't have a motor pool that we can transfer somebody to. Every person in this agency from top to bottom has to have the ability to go testify in court and not have those kind of discredits to their testimony, because it impacts every one of us.
Captain Madden, if I may add real quick, that's also on our posting when we do job postings, that you cannot have any Brady Giglio issues at all. They're not eligible to be hired at our agency. Thank you.
So yes, and we check with the district attorney's offices in the area, and depending on the agency, even sometimes the federal prosecutors as well. Another safeguard we have here in Johnson County is the multi-jurisdictional officer involved shooting team. So when an officer involved shooting occurs, the agency that's involved in the shooting cannot be a member or cannot have a member on the investigative team. So that team is comprised of experienced detectives from all over the county, years of experience. Our Detective Sergeant Mike Palmieri is a member of that. He responds to nearly all of the officer involved shootings and helps with sort out the investigation of those. It's completely independent of your agency. They essentially take over the entire case. We don't speak to the media. They handle all the media. They handle all aspects of it to make sure that it's handled appropriately. No information is getting out that should not be getting out, especially in the most critical hours of those types of investigations. And those reports are submitted directly to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office then reviews all of those cases just like they would any other criminal case, and makes a finding of whether or not the officer was acting within the law. So there's also that safeguard for making sure that there's independent investigations occurring as in the event of officer involved shootings.
Okay, I had hoped to have a more detailed matrix available, and so that is a work in progress. I inherited this portion a little bit late, but I did want to share just verbally this evening some of the information that we've collected so far on how some of our other neighboring jurisdictions here in Johnson County in particular are handling citizen review or advisory boards. And I will tell you there are a variety of options. So I'll just run through those very quickly. Do you have to turn your video on? Oh, yep, sorry.
We lost your audio.
You're on mute, Laura.
We don't have your audio.
It's mentioned in the chat feature by Ann O'Leary. If Dan turns on his audio, Laura can speak through it.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. We even practiced earlier today. Okay, so I will be talking about citizen police advisory councils, and I didn't have this information compiled in the pretty matrix and table as I had hoped, but we will still work on that. So I was just going to run through very quickly some of the information that we found. There are a number of jurisdictions here in Johnson County and throughout the metro that are using citizen police advisory boards and councils in a variety of different ways. Typically, I will tell you that those come in what our initial research has found in kind of two forms. One is a Citizens Police Advisory Council that serves in a liaison role, looks at studying, recommending, and reviewing police programs, working to build better understanding and relationships between the police department and the community. In some instances, so for example, in the city of Olathe, their Citizens Police Advisory Council then also reviews all bias-based policing complaints that have been investigated through the Internal Affairs Division, and they provide a disposition for each complaint. In Overland Park, they have an independent citizen advisory board for racial profiling that does looks at similar complaints. They also have a separate civil service commission, which reviews, approves, and assists the police department in the promotion process for officers and serves as an appeals board when officers below a certain rank are terminated, demoted, or suspended. In Prairie Village, they have currently a civil service commission that again assists in determining qualifications at initial hire and then for the promotion of officers. And they also serve as an appeal board for commissioned officers within the department. I can tell you that in conversation this week, I know Prairie Village is exploring the expansion of the role of their civil service commission. So stay tuned. The city of Fairway has a very unique committee structure. So each department is actually managed by, or the work of the departments comes through committees. And those committees are comprised of both council members and citizens. So for example, in Fairway, the police committee is made up of 4 council members and 2 citizens. The city of Lenexa has a community advisory board, and their purpose is to advise and assist the department on issues of bias-based policing, particularly in the areas of policy development, community outreach, education, communication, recruiting, and hiring. And then in the city of Gardner, they have a Citizens Police Advisory Committee that serves as an advisory board, just that, working to better improve and foster understanding between the police department and the community, and advising the city council on police programs and services. In Shawnee, they have a civil service commission, again, primarily for hearing disciplinary appeals for commissioned officers below a certain rank. And then they also advise and assist in policy development, education, community outreach, and communications related to racial profiling that's required by the Kansas statutes. And Shawnee indicates that they are also in process of looking at some modifications and changes. So certainly as we get this information pulled together and updated, and everyone that I spoke with through this process said, please send me the compiled table and what everyone else is doing. I can tell you, for example, in Roland Park, they recently formed a citizen advisory committee that is going to assist them in working with Lexipol to update all of their department policies. And then they have a separate sort of racial equity, social justice committee, citizens committee that they are in the process of forming that was part of a previous strategic plan and identified as a goal for, I believe, 2022 or 23, and they've moved that up in the process. So some of these other communities, Overland Park and Olathe, I know for sure also have sort of human rights, human relations commissions as well. So I think certainly as we continue through our conversations and we think about the advantages or opportunities that we might have to broaden that more independent look in our processes and procedures, there are some models that we can certainly look to.
Turn your video on.
All right. It was important that we share some of the lessons that we've learned, growth opportunities that we've discovered as we've gone through this process ourselves. And you know, it's not all inclusive. It's just some of the things, you know, and some of it's based on the questions that we received, and some of it's based on what we've known or seen. And the first one is we need to improve our recruiting and to build a more diverse department. You know, it's real easy to sit back and say, well, that's the way we've always done it. That's the way we've been successful. But I think some of the things that we can do is to work with some of the community groups that we have in our area that have a diverse membership, and try to find out what we can do to increase our applicant pool to make it more diverse. We need to find out if there are job fairs that target maybe underserved communities or more diverse communities, and reach out and participate in those job fairs to really get that handle on making our department reflect our community. Another thing we need to do is we need to collect better data. You know, our data is kept in silos that doesn't communicate with one another. Use of force data is in one spot, and internal affairs data is in another spot, and training records are in another spot. And they don't communicate with one another. We need our data to have some context to it. You know, including, you know, bias-based stats, all of those things that generally would make up what you would call an early warning system. You know, you set points or associated with events, and if an officer gets a certain number of points within a period of time, it sends a flag to their supervisor that they need to go and look and say, hey, what's going on with this officer? Why all of a sudden have they had an increase in use of force? Why, you know, they've been in 2 vehicle accidents in the last 6 months, and, you know, it starts that dive into, you know, is the officer's wellness okay? You know, what's happening? Is there something going on in the officer's personal life that's impacting their performance? We need to have that early warning system and have the data in there that can give us context to the information that we provide. We just struggle with how to analyze that in its raw format without having more sets of data to look at. The other thing that this would accomplish is that if we had all these systems working in one, under one software, it would allow for us to get data for public dashboards to just increase our transparency. You know, after we decide on what that looks like and what are the important issues that people want to see and what's that time frame look like. It's important to us that we have that information out there because we need people to believe in us. And, you know, we talk about how the state mandates bias-based training. What the state doesn't mandate is what that training looks like. What are the guidelines that you have to follow to say that you had this bias-based policing? So instead of waiting for the state, we need to set our own standards for that. We need to make a goal of at least 10% of the required 40 hours must be related to bias-based and or de-escalation. We just need to take charge of this and try to see what we can do to improve our training on these important topics. And then what we need to do is, since we'll have all the data to analyze, we need to see what those impacts are. Evaluate the impacts of the additional training on the bias-based statistics, the use of force incidents and complaints that we have against our officers. So it gives us a complete picture of our department, how we're performing, what's our culture. It gives us an accurate way to measure as well. Another thing we need to do, and it's covered a lot in our newest policy, but we need to make our complaint forms more accessible to the public. And, we need to have those available online. The way that people are, operate in today's world, we need to accommodate for that. Like I said, it's important that we have good contact information, and we prefer to talk to somebody, but we need to adjust our ways to make sure that we're accepting those complaints and have a good way of accepting and tracking any citizen complaints that we get. So that's something that is already in the works that we are working on as we, up till about 5 o'clock this afternoon. So.
Councilmember Davis, the question is, the software currently available and what is the cost?
We are evaluating some of the software. Some of the software is more in depth. Some of it requires a little bit more IT information that we need to get. But the one that we've investigated in the most detail is something called LEFTA systems. That's LEFTA systems. And they offer a complete package that for all training requests, digitizes all of those things and makes reporting on those very easy. There are a couple of other programs that we want to evaluate before we bring any recommendations or requests. I believe the cost for the LEFTA systems was approximately $5,500 per year. I know I see Councilmember Davis' question or statement about making that countywide. That always proves to be somewhat difficult to do those projects countywide because some agencies have a fleet of IT folks and some agencies don't. So some agencies can pull some of those stats just because all of their data is there in one place. So sometimes those reporting systems work on a regional level, but oftentimes it's difficult to get the little guys to the table for some of those projects.
Captain?
Are there, Councilmember Boultinghouse has a question.
Oh, sorry. I just had a couple questions that I was saving here. I was wondering on the screen when you showed the flow chart on the hiring process, if you could talk to where you see the most drop off or what the biggest obstacle is that weeds people out of the process. If you could kind of speak to that, I think that'd be interesting.
Absolutely, good question. There's several spots in there. One of the interview is where we lose a lot of people. If you get into when I look at resumes, it's just, I look at some consistency, and you really don't know. You want to look at a clean professional resume, and that's basically what I look at first, and then we call them in for that interview. And that's where you get a feel of what kind of, with some of the questions that we have. And that would be something I'd be happy to do offline with any of you to talk about some of the questions we have on our interview panel. Some of them are situational questions. Some of them are dealing with stress. And then there's some common questions in there that tell us why you're the best candidate for the job. But we're trying to look at a broad picture of this person in a small amount of time. Speaking with Laura and Chief Madden too, we're in the process of looking at revamping these questions too, and updating them to more relevant topics and things that we would want to hear and see how they react in certain situations. So they're great questions that we have right now, but they can be better. And I think that we lose most people in the interview process because if we've got a good interview, once we move into the next step, we're pretty comfortable with that product as we're moving it forward, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I was going to ask about what the specific questions were, a couple examples in the interview, but I'd be happy to follow up too with you guys. So.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I had a question related to either the interview or the psych profile, and just if any of that gets towards questions or areas, you know, of racial animus or bias, or are there any pieces that address those areas?
Go ahead. Yeah, so that's touched on in the psychological examination. It's also touched on in the CVSA, or the voice stress. We ask questions about if they have any predisposed notions to any ethnicities or races, or if they've ever belonged to any groups that associate with, you know, hate, anything along those lines. So those are things that we're bringing out in the voice stress as well as the psychologists.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions for us?
I have one more question about your software. With the larger police departments that have the IT support and so forth, is there any option for outsourcing, you know, your needs by purchasing services from those cities?
It becomes a little bit more difficult as those things go. We have, if you look at our records management system right now, you know, there are things that the agencies that have the IT services that can do more efficiently than us at this point. They have larger staffs. They have a greater amount of information or data that they need because of volume. We work with those agencies on different products at times, but for a project like this, you kind of customize it to your terminology, to your fit your agency better. And you know, the products that we're looking at all accomplish that. So if we have our use of force report digitized with their system, it's going to capture the data that we capture. Now, for the most part, everyone's capturing similar data for use of force and field training and those things, but I'd rather have this completely customized to the way we do it than have to adjust our way to the way they do it.
Thank you.
Chief, I have a question, which it's great calling you that, by the way.
Oh, thanks, I appreciate it.
This new position. What an interesting time to step in. I had a question about who, you know, who's really making those data-driven decisions once, you know, we get potentially a new data software in the works, and even really what we have going right now. I'm wondering about the process that we have now. You know, who's holding that data? You know, who's got the pen and paper tallying, so to speak.
Right. So and that kind of goes back to the silos. You know, we look at all the data together at different points. So when you look at, and I guess I'll answer your first question first. Like when you talk about the bias-based statistics, early on in this process, we realized that our data was not answering any questions for us. So we can't break down of those percentages that we talked about last week, you know, what percentage of white males were stopped on pedestrian check compared to black males. You know, we need to be able to break that data down to analyze it better. We've started collecting additional information last month, so we should have the first month we should have with the new data that we're collecting that will include some of that, which should be available here in the next couple of weeks. But that's something that, like I said, going through this process has really benefited us as well in identifying some of those gaps that we have. So we get monthly reports regarding the bias-based stats, crime statistics, and you know, we're small enough to where we kind of just know the internal affairs and the use of force data, but we want to be able to capture it in more meaningful ways and be able to truly break it down better for you, for the community, for the rest of our staff, to make sure that we're doing a good job and not missing something.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments for?
Yeah, actually, I just have one quick comment. I'm glad we're reviewing a lot of these policies. I think it's good to take a look at this stuff periodically. I do want to say, though, a couple things maybe that aren't really called out here that I think is important to touch on is, one, I know at least since I've been involved with the city, our police department has had body cameras, and I think that's a great thing that we got in front of that. I know it's taken a lot longer for a lot of other departments to adopt that, and I think that just really helps with accountability on both sides and just having, you know, better transparency if there is an issue. But I think almost more importantly to all that stuff, our police department does a great job with the community involvement, community outreach, and I really want to make sure that we continue to emphasize that and encourage any of our officers, or, you know, any city staff really, to continue to stay involved in any of those community events, whether it's, you know, doing stuff with the schools, or hopefully someday we'll get to start having coffee with the cop again when we can go and all get together. I mean, even over the weekend doing the Harvesters Food Drive, I know, you know, there were people there helping out. So I think that's really, really important to help build that sense of community, give people kind of a name and face to everybody. And I just really appreciate the work that our police department does there, and the emphasis that we've had on that. And I know it's not something that you put in the policy manual necessarily, but I think it's great to continue to encourage that kind of involvement. So keep up the good work.
And we are excited to see everyone. We have to see the same people in the station every day. We never get to leave. So we're excited to get back to those things as well.
And you know, that was one thing I'll piggyback on real quick. And thank you, Nick, for the words with that. Between our body cameras, which we're reviewing use of force, and I'd be happy again offline one time to show you guys the old body camera footage and the new body camera footage that we have. It's night and day. It's outstanding. And having the ability to review things with good quality video and audio is so crucial nowadays. And secondly, our city council and Laura Smith with Lexapol has been very instrumental with us being up to date with everything that's going on in the world today, and having up to date policies that keep not only our city safe but our officers safe. So that's not only the department, but that's our city as a whole, and you as council members. We appreciate that.
Dan, I have a comment. As we move forward in trying to kind of understand and analyze all our numbers and what they look like, we all know that we don't live in a vacuum in this city, and many times our officers are called for multi-jurisdictional activity. Kansas City, Missouri, Wyandotte County, other cities. How are the numbers impacted by the calls that this community has to make or sacrifice our police officers to help other communities? How are we counting those?
Well, generally speaking, anytime our officers go to another agency for any significant period of time and any significant role, they write a report. So we track that. We can pull up reports of anytime our officers write. It's called an assist outside agency. We can pull that up through dispatch and the computer-aided dispatch program, and as well as generally speaking, there's a report unless, you know, they were on their way to help them and then they got called off. So we track that, and like Captain Wayne explained last week, even if we are in another city, another jurisdiction helping out their agency, we're still following our own policy. So if we are helping them on a situation, a building search or some, you know, another similar situation, and our gun is pointed at somebody, we're doing a use of force report. So it's always going to be, you know, documented that those. So we look at those use of force, or outside agency assists, but you know, we too also request other agencies to come help us from time to time. So
absolutely,
it's an important part of our job that, you know, when we have you know, 3 or 4 people working, and one call can, you know, when we had that fatality accident last week, you know, that wiped out, you know, almost our whole shift. We had to have other agencies cover some of our calls during those periods of time. So we rely on one another, but we always follow our policy when we're in other cities.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Welcome.
We have any other?
I just wanted to add that I really appreciate the self-reflection and the acknowledgement, you know, there are areas that the police department, but the, you know, the city as a whole can do. And, you know, it's clear that staff and command staff in particular have really taken the time to think through these issues and, you know, come to council with good information. I just really appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. Glad to do it. It's been a good experience.
Okay. Hearing no further comments, Dan, does that complete your dialogue for the evening?
I think so. I'm getting some evil eyes. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, you and Captain Lane both. You're great assets for our city, and we value you highly.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, let's return to the end of our finance meeting if we can. There are no further discussion items for tonight. And I'll ask Laura if we have any department updates for finance and administration. Laura?
Muted again.
She does not have any updates. She's relayed to me.
Okay, great. It is now 8:50 p.m. and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. I thank you for all being in attendance, and we'll now go back to Community Development. Sollie, Flora.
Yes, thank you, Debbie. So it is now, as Debbie said, well, now it's 8:51, I guess, and we will resume our Community Development Committee meeting with our second public presentation of the evening for the CDC. This will be from our building official, Jim Brown, on the adoption of the 2018 edition of the International Codes for Building Construction and the 2017 edition of the National Electric Code. Mr. Brown, can you please share with the committee your presentation?
Chairman Flora, can I jump in?
Yes.
Brian speaking. Just getting late in the hour, and Jim's presentation could be very lengthy if you'd like it to be. or it could be somewhat high level. All the information was shared in your packet. So I guess if there's any questions, maybe we could kind of jump there. And let me give you a little bit of a background. Yeah. I know there were some questions last month when we put this on the agenda about the energy efficiency code. And I've kind of got myself to speed a little bit on that, and I discussed it with Jim. And these plans, again, is kind of a way of background. The International Code of Consuls adopts plans every 3 years. All the cities in the metropolitan area get together and review those plans, make amendments that are kind of consistent across the jurisdictions. And we do that every 6 years. And so we're kind of in that 6-year cycle now with the 2018 plans. Some of the cities have already gone ahead and adopted those. Some like us are just now kind of getting around to it. Kansas City adopted those codes about a year, not even quite a year ago, maybe a few months ago. And there was some thought about not adopting the energy efficiency conservation codes. Instead, the 2021 codes are much more progressive in taking a stance on energy conservation. And so the council decided to hold off adopting 2018 and to look at the 2021 codes when they come out. The International Council Code has adopted the 2021 codes, but they haven't been officially published yet. So there's nothing physical to actually look at in terms of a final document. So I think that set of codes is actually due out in the next month or two. So we would like to take some time to look at those codes, see how they kind of interact with the 2018 codes. There's a family of codes and they do work together. And we'd also like to talk to some of the other jurisdictions, including Kansas City, about their approach to adopting those codes. And then I think it's only fair that we reach out to architects and contractors and the Home Builders Association, have some discussions with them. So that's a little bit of our strategy for this fall. At some point, we report back to the Sustainability Commission and kind of go into more depth conversation with them about the codes, and particularly energy conservation code. So with that said, if you'd like to hear Jim's presentation tonight, or if you
Brian,
this version of it, or if you have questions you just want to ask, we can follow up on a later date.
Brian?
Yeah, Councilmember Davis, yeah.
I have a question. I know that you're having the Sustainability Commission review these, but I was also wondering, does the Planning Commission review these codes?
No, Planning Commission is more about land use. The codes are more about building safety. And I'll tell you, one of the things that is going to come out of the code process when we do adopt those is we need to adopt a building appeals board. So it's kind of like the Planning Commission has the Building Zoning Board of Adjustment. We need a board for building appeals, so that when somebody...
We're in the process of that too.
I'm sorry?
We're in the process of that, if anybody can hear me. We're looking at establishing a Board of Code Appeals. That's who typically looks at all the code bodies before it ever gets to the level that it's being presented to a committee or the council going forward, because we've already vetted out all of the discussions. And just to bring a brief background, if we don't want to get into the full-fledged presentation, which, by the way, I do have the condensed version I'm presenting to you this evening, and it's still 107 slides. So we may not want to go down that path at this point. But to provide a bit of a brief history in the codes in and of themselves is not something new. It's not something relatively modern. Some people have a tendency to believe that when quite actually the first recorded and documented case of building codes dates back over 5,000 years ago. Code of Hammurabi, which was the founder of the Babylonian Empire, he established the first building codes. And although strict, They were very, very effective, whereas quite simply, if a builder built a house and that work was not strong and it collapsed and it killed the householder, well, then the builder was slain. So it's, you know, it's in your best interest at that point that you want to build the strongest structures possible. And other penalties such as that existed for quite a few centuries, actually. In the United States, we have our first codes dating back to about the year 1630 in Boston. Various other code bodies have been established more in modern times. Codes change specifically almost always due to some catastrophic event. Something has occurred that causes mass property destruction and life loss. Great Chicago Fire, burning of Rome. There's something that's underlying that causes these codes to be spurred ahead to make a more safe structure for all. In modern times, we've had in the United States 3 to 4 different code bodies, both Uniform Building Codes, Southern Building Code Congress International, building officials and code administrator we call BOCA. In various parts of the country, we're under one or more divisions of this code. Other states have adopted statewide codes where it matters not where you serve. The code is the same, regardless of jurisdiction, regardless of county, regardless of city. It's statewide. That is something I experienced during my tenure in Cincinnati. State of Ohio has a statewide building code. Now, in the International Code Council, when that merger came to be, everything consolidated for the most part in the year 2000. So the International Code Council now is the governing body of codes that are predominant throughout the United States, and they include International Building Code, International Fire Code, International Residential Code, International Plumbing Code, International Mechanical Code, International Fuel Gas Code, International Energy Conservation Code, and the National Electric Code is an NFPA standard, actually, NFPA 70, that goes along with these codes to provide the electrical protection, electrical requirements that we see. These codes are vetted on a 3-year cycle, as Brian said. And quite frankly, one cycle is not totally completed before the next cycle begins. For the 2021 edition of the codes, the 2 codes that are available for purchase right now would be the International Plumbing Code, International Mechanical Code. All other bodies of the code, to include International Energy Conservation Code, will be available. Actually, they're available for pre-order at this point. They will be available hard copy and for distribution sometime in October. I also attended, to get somewhat back where we are now, where we stand with what I'm presenting this evening, there was many series of meetings that were held in downtown KC-Mo at the fire department headquarters. It was multi-jurisdictional, there was many people involved. This reached through May and December of 2018. During my tenure at that time, when I was still in Belton, before I came to work for the City of Mission, there was many discussions, meetings, a lot of voices, a lot of discussion with architects, design professionals, homeowners, homes associations. So what's before you is basically a consolidated effort to the best of our ability to try to keep a somewhat consensus on critical code pieces throughout the metro-wide area, the greater Kansas City metro area. During those meetings, which I will admit I'm somewhat hard of hearing, but I did not hear mention at the time of KC-Mo going down the path of the 2021 Energy Conservation Code at that time. Perhaps there were discussions, and obviously there were discussions that happened either behind the scene or since that time. And they are indeed looking at that possibility. What I'm not aware of this evening is what does that look like? What amendments perhaps are they going to have to the 2021? Is it going to mirror what we've already discussed in our code meetings as relative to the 2018 edition? Or is no amendments proposed and it's going to be stricter? The 2021 Energy Code, if we want to speak to that just a little, it is indeed going to be 10% or greater energy conservation measures than what even the 2018 can accomplish. But we need to understand too, when the code bodies, the international family of codes, they act as a family, they're a collective group. For instance, the building code may be affected by the energy conservation code. Mechanical codes are always affected by that. The more efficient, the proper and correct references to what mechanical systems are going to be in play, along with how the building is constructed, needs to be related in other code bodies. And that's always the case. For example, now we can have in a single family residence 2x4 exterior wall, 16-inch on center, which would allow what is allowed now, an R13 insulation factor. 2021, that's not the case, it's R20. I don't know of a way to condense the insulation or have a version of the insulation. There is no bad insulation that would fit that cavity to meet that requirement. As such, the exterior wall must be 2x6, excuse me. So what is that going to cost the builders? So some of the discussions on the 2021, when it was vetted, the National Home Builders Association in meetings, and they were very much involved in the process. And the process is that code hearings occur at various times throughout the year. So in those code hearings, part of it is for individuals on the committee. It's brought to the committees. The committee has their hearing piece, and then there's a public hearing piece. Most always on the International Code Council at the annual convention, there's set aside time that these items are voted on and discussed in great detail in a room full of thousands of representatives, not only vendors, but architects, design professionals, the homes association, people that opposition, people that are in favor of. And the International Code Council vets all of this, and then they have a vote, and the vote is what mandates how the code is changed and what it changes to. It was reported by the National Association of Home Builders that during this, at both the ICC committee hearings, which were held in Albuquerque last May, the public comment hearings were held in Las Vegas, October 2019. Through all of that, when the votes came back, it was understood some of the items that they had been pushing for the National Association of Home Builders somehow resurfaced. So when that happens, what happens when anything that's been defeated on the committee and the public hearing side, if the votes come in and it's defeated at that level, now again, there's still going to be one final voting process. And I need to mention that that voting process is being even further greatly escalated and enhanced by the International Code Council, whereas in 2015, for the first time, they allowed online voting. So the discrepancies the Home Builders Association were trying to point out was who is voting in the online voting? It was defeated in two other hearing bodies. How is it going to now show up? We got 20 separate items that we thought were defeated are now back on board and have been approved and are now going to be introduced in the 2021 Energy Conservation Code. How does that occur? So they are questioning more so the process, I think, than anything else, not so much what was approved. The chief ones that they had consideration about and were somewhat upset about was gas, water heaters, stoves, dryers. They need to be electric ready with appropriate receptacles installed nearby. The homeowner does decide they want to switch to off. So basically the receptacle is already there. The other one that probably caused the most discussion in the hearings was it would be required that an electric vehicle charging receptacle be installed in all new single-family homes. In those cases, it's a 40 amp, 220 volt receptacle, whatever the cost of that may be. And it's going to be in all single-family homes, somewhere in the garage or somewhere where it's easy for someone to plug up their electric vehicle. Mentioned that wall insulation is going to increase to R20 in climate zone 4, which we are indeed climate zone 4. The ceiling insulation goes from R49 to R60. So it was their consensus, and what they've done is a preliminary analysis, and I haven't dove deep enough into this to give you a full in-depth discussion on this, but as their estimation, it is a price range of $5,000 to $14,000 per single family home increase for everyone that they build, just to accommodate the energy conservation measures without factoring in any other code body that could be affected by that and what the cost of that would be. For instance, what is the mechanical unit going to cost? What is that increase? What is the framing cost going to be? So we hear this on a national stage, we hear it on a local stage, we hear it on many developers and builders and architects and the design professionals. My duty and my role in this city is to serve the city of Mission and to enforce the code bodies as they are adopted, whatever they may be. It is not my code. It is adopted, it is discussed in detail, and it's what is voted on by council. It is what we go forward with. With that saying, I will continue to stand proudly as the vigilant guardian for each and every citizen in the city, for each and every business owner, to absolutely assure the safest built environment that we could possibly have. Ultimately, the purpose of these codes is to provide minimum standards, and remember, it's minimum, for safety, health, general welfare, including structural integrity, safe means of egress, fire prevention and control, to provide adequate water and sanitation, light, ventilation, and energy conservation. So we will pursue the path as I'm directed to pursue. For this evening, I think our next step and what staff is trying to recommend as the next step is possibly to just, we do a separate presentation and provide that to the Mission Sustainability Commission in the near future. That's to provide some educational piece, and it provides us enough time to have a conversation with KCMO and see where they stand on it, because I don't know the answer to the question of what exactly are they adopting at this time. We don't even have the code book in front of us at this point. Are they going to amend it? I don't have an answer to that this time, but we will research and reach out to them and see what path they're pursuing. The other item that I want to discuss with them is KCMO's already adopted the 2018 edition of the code across the board, with the exception of energy conservation code. So it makes me question as to what energy conservation code are they utilizing in the interim period? And if they adopt the 2021, what changes are they going to have to make to what they've already approved and adopted to accommodate the extra revisions of the energy code?
Jim, can I jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
I think maybe what we're hearing from you and Brian is that, we have the detailed information about the codes presented in our packet, but that it might make sense for staff to go back and one, see what Casey Moe is doing, two, talk to our Sustainability Commission, and three, wait to really bring this to council until you can at least get eyes on the 2021 code. Is that all fair in terms of process?
I agree, yes.
So with that, does anyone on council want to hear more details tonight, or do we want to wait for this to come back to us?
I think we wait.
It looks like Hillary said the same thing in the chat, that maybe let's wait for further detail. I would just say for anyone who's listening, we do have a very, very thorough PowerPoint in the packet that does go through a lot of these issues in terms of changes in the 2018 codes as opposed to, I believe it was the 2011 code before that. So that is a really good resource if anyone is wanting to dive further in the interim. But it looks like we have a council consensus to maybe wait and hear more on this after we get some more information from Casey Moe and from our Sustainability Commission.
If anybody has any questions about the other set of codes, feel free to reach out to Jim or I and compile those.
We are very fortunate to have Jim. His wisdom has taken us a long way.
Well, that's much
yes,
appreciated.
these are highly technical matters, and so it's much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for approving his position in the budget a few years ago.
Exactly.
It'd be on my pay grade.
Yeah, any questions you may have, whatever they may be, regardless of which code body it could be, if you have time to overview and look at the PowerPoint at your leisure, feel free to send each and every one of those to me directly at my email. And
Jim, that PowerPoint.
And we did have one at, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just saying that PowerPoint was excellent. I really appreciated going through the examples and the pictures that kind of illustrate what the issues are. I really appreciate it.
And we do have one more comment in the chat as well from Josh Thiede, who's on our Sustainability Commission and is a Ward 4 resident. He notes that he's discussed with myself and Councilmember Davis the codes, and he would encourage Mission to be at a minimum average efficiency and above average to be a leader for the metro area. And I think that the steps that you've outlined, Brian and Jim, would allow for that possibility. So really appreciate all the hard work. And he specifically advocates for evaluation of the IECC 2021 version for significant efficiency over the 2018 IECC.
I will obtain one as soon as available.
All right. Unless we have any more questions, we'll conclude that presentation. We've already addressed our lone action item for the evening, which was acceptance of our minutes. So we will move on to discussion items. We have a Mohawk, one item for discussion, that's Penn Almoney with an update on Mohawk Park update plan.
And Councilmember Flora, can everybody hear me now? Okay,
yes.
Sorry. I moved back to my office and dropped everything in the process, so my apologies. I'm going to jump in very quickly, and I think Penn and I were talking about this earlier, and just in the interest of time, I think we'll go through some of this at a very high level, but we've got some time. There are a lot of things I think we're going to want to discuss and explore, but those may come into clear focus in another month or two once, and I don't want to steal all of his thunder, but once we get through the potential for a determination and a grant process. So let us walk through just kind of a quick update on where we are in this process. And then this will give you an opportunity to sort of take some of this information, mull it over. We will bring it back when we can put some better clarity around that. But I just wanted to very quickly start off by saying, you know, this conceptual master planning process at the individual park level was something that we brought to you, and we feel very strongly is a key component to us being able to advance a very comprehensive long-range plan for improvements to our parks, particularly as we move forward and potentially ask our residents to renew a dedicated Parks and Recreation sales tax. And as I think you'll see, so this process is something that we do intend to replicate throughout all of our major parks at a minimum. But I think many of the things that we see, allows us not only to involve staff and members of the PRT and the City Council, but also neighbors and other interested stakeholders in any of our parks. We really envision, and while the numbers that you're going to see around the amenities and the improvements in Mohawk Park are big, they're all going to look big for us going forward because we haven't made significant investments in our parks. For example, in Mohawk, it was purchased in 2003. And 17 years later, I would go out on a limb and say we've spent less than $150,000 total on improvements to that park. And it shows, and that's not uncommon in our other parks. So the numbers that we're going to be talking about as we go through conceptual master plans for Mohawk and our other parks are going to be big, and they're going to be bigger than anything we've ever talked about before. But we're trying to create those parameters. I think as we've talked with Confluence and internally, I think if we kind of target, and we think we could target about a $10 million total plan across our park system over the next 10 years, that would allow us to make some really visible enhancements and improvements to the amenities that we're offering to both our residents and visitors to our community. So the conceptual planning also gives us, as you'll see, an opportunity to pursue grant funding. And it also creates the opportunities for us with that long range plan to, number one, be able to install the improvements and amenities in a way, if we take a phased approach, that doesn't preclude us or prohibit us or restrict us from developing that park appropriately. And it also provides us with some flexibility. So if we experience economic downturns or budget shortfalls or budget windfalls, it gives us the opportunity to have that larger, bigger picture plan in place to be more flexible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Penn. He'll kind of run through where we are in this process, and then know that we know there will be a lot of things in the coming months that you all will want to talk about.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks, Laura. So through this process, we're going to touch upon some public comments, revised options, perspective views, and financial considerations that Laura had mentioned. The model that we've created for conceptual redesign includes soliciting a council member, representation from Park Recreation and Tree Commission, as well as 1 or 2 representatives from major stakeholder groups, and then including 1 or 2 citizens that live in close proximity to the park. So we've done that here with Mohawk Park, and through the process, we meet as a committee, we review the Park and Recreation Master Plan, some of the recommendations in there, as well as recommendations from the Park Recreation and Tree Commission specifically. And then we create 1 or 2 option design layouts that show the amenities, that touch upon the recommendations and the appropriate areas that make the park make sense. And then, as you can see here, we take it for public meeting and input. This is what we presented to Mission residents back in February, which is such a long time ago. Some of the highlights from the public input were, we don't need a full court, let's go half court. Let's not do the fitness stations, even though that was in the Park and Recreation Master Plan. We definitely need more vegetation, trees, and more screening elements, berms to protect balls from rolling out into the road, keep the backstop, and then potentially remove the northwest sidewalk. So what we do is we take the highlights from public engagement and feedback, and we merge it into the next level, or kind of the final conceptual plan, And we review that as a committee. We review that as a Park Recreation and Tree Commission, and we review that internally and gather feedback and consensus. And you can see here, we took some of the best aspects of each of those two options, and this is what resulted. And then you submit that to a designer. They come back with some perspective views that allows you to share that message a little bit more effectively with council members and say, this is what vegetation looks like. This is what berming looks like. This is what an engaging trail system looks like. So in this left picture here, this is a perspective from Lamar looking east. And then on the picture on the right, that's a picture from Millhaven facing south. So you can kind of see the natural grasses there. You can see on that right-hand picture, there's parking on the Millhaven side so that parking doesn't obstruct residents, you know, if there are any activities or things of that nature. Feedback from the steering committee is that there was a strong preference for a custom look and feel. And if you look at Mohawk Park, it's 7.8 acres. It's pretty expansive and relatively large for our community. And really the opportunity that we've got to best highlight that look and feel is through architecture. And so we took a couple options and variations of restrooms and presented them at the public engagement and got pretty strong consensus that they wanted a breezeway with the opportunity to wash hands or get a drink outside, and that's on the left-hand side of this structure. And then they wanted 3 units that were all ADA accessible, meaning a family could go in, take care of the family's needs as a group, and that's going to the bathroom, change clothes, wash their hands inside, and then exit and enjoy the amenities out in the park. So we feel like this design has a strong visual impact. What we've kind of done through this process is worked with SFS Architecture and got a prefabricated vendor who's given us costing and merged both a unique and one-off kind of design with a prefabricated standard. And so we've merged those two and come up with this. So as part of the meeting last Friday, we met with the steering committee. We proposed these new perspective views. We reviewed the estimate of probable costs and got their feedback on some of the hiccups we've had because of COVID-19 and funding elements. And some of the feedback they got was 3.5 is a big number, but you can understand all of the things that we're asking for. Why? Concrete walks, 45,000 square feet at 300,000, parking lot, lighting, utilities, earthwork, playgrounds, lighting, and shade systems, as well as a restroom and a shelter. You're getting a pretty significant investment in one location. And we understood going in that this wasn't going to be constructed in one year. Funding wasn't going to be in place to do that. And so we had anticipated breaking this into 3 to 5 different phases and reviewed that phasing with the steering committee this past weekend. And the feedback they gave was, if we're doing phase construction, let's keep it usable. Let's make as big an impact as possible. Let's look at alternatives. Do we do just a trail remodel? Do we add just a playground element? Is there anything we can do this year that can kind of minimize the impact to construction costs increasing in the future? And the consensus was to deliver on what we committed to, which was a restroom at the very least. And there, we'll see in phase 1B, which is the next picture, that there are some cost savings if we do a restroom and a shelter pavilion in one construction phase, to the tune of about 50 to 75,000. But I'd be remiss if I didn't share that the steering committee wanted me to share that this is long overdue. As Laura mentioned, it's been 17 years since we took over ownership and roughly $100,000 of investment. So the time is now to move, listen to the recommendations of our citizens. With that said, here's another opportunity, potentially building in the structure shelter combo with a restroom. It does raise the price point to 1 million plus. And in an effort to keep this kind of high level, wanted to share with you that I applied for a Land Water Conservation Fund grant. They will fund up to $300,000 if they feel that your project is appropriate and in line with their vision. They primarily fund land acquisition or development of outdoor recreation facilities. And the only caveat is that you need to keep this site in perpetuity, completely dedicated to outdoor recreation areas. So as long as we keep Mohawk Park set aside as a park for outdoor recreation, there won't be any issues. But if there's ever an opportunity to kind of transfer that park into maybe housing or something along those lines, and it's a pretty convoluted process to transfer that. But so we should hear in the next 2 months a decision on whether funding is awarded to City of Mission. If that's the case, we could receive upwards of $300,000 to put toward a project, keeping in mind that if council would approve and say that we can find some money somewhere, the design process takes about 4 to 6 months. And then once you break ground, a significant invoice probably wouldn't hit our tables until fiscal year 2022. So those are all things worth considering and weighing in on. But are there any questions?
Questions for Penn at this stage?
Ken, I have a question. The design doesn't show any like soccer field. Is that something that would be added later, or is that not planned for the park?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilman. We actually got some negative feedback saying, why is this only utilized for soccer? So what we did there is just earmark it for open use space or open green space. So we could program that for community-wide gathering events, or we could program that for a rental group that wanted to utilize it for soccer fields. But the size space on that western edge would accommodate a full-size adult field if necessary, along with kind of a preschool kindergarten size field just north of that. And then the field on the eastern edge, that open space, could accommodate that 11 to 12-year-old size field that it's currently being used for.
I think Hillary had the next question.
Hi, Penn.
Hi.
Thanks for coming to present tonight. Could you talk a little bit about the playground and you know, its accessibility features?
You bet. So we can pick and choose playground elements. And so they essentially set aside $450,000 in the budget for us to decide what the theming was. But the general consensus is we need to have a 2 to 5-year-old play, and then we need to have a 5 to 12-year-old play feature, and then put it on poured in place rubber surface so that it's accessible throughout. That should make any kind of maintenance a little bit easier on our end in terms of getting ADA accessible use to our citizens and any visitors that may be there. But we can pick and choose. We haven't chosen specific elements as of yet.
Right, and then I just had a follow-up. Laura, you mentioned $10 million in 10 years, and I know the vision is to have this conceptual plan and then plan out for the other parks as well. And I'm excited about that idea. I would like to kind of get that rough plan on paper and just see how that correlates. I know that we want to focus our attention on Mohawk right now, and I'm excited about that, but I just want to see how that correlates to the Parks Master Plan and the broader, our broader plan for the next 10 years as best as we can, even though I know we're not going to do all the conceptual designs right at the moment, but having an idea of where we're going. I feel like I'm excited about Mohawk, and I know it's our biggest piece of land that we have for our parks to use, but we also have a park deficit in the north part of the city. So for me, the prospect of, $3.5 million in one park, even if it's over phases, is challenging for me to swallow. But if I can look at, the trajectory of where this energy is going for the next few years, I think that can help as I talk to constituents. So that's something I would like to see if we could get that together, before we, finalize, before we move ahead in this process is, I guess, what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've talked about, when we sort of engaged Confluence in this conceptual planning process is that obviously we can't produce the pretty drawings and the perspective views. So we will always have to pay someone to do that piece for us. But I think in terms of just managing the process and conducting the public meetings and gathering the input, that is certainly something that we've been taking notes on and documenting, and we can replicate throughout our other parks. Our intent when we started with Mohawk Park pre-COVID was that we would get this process moving, and that by this summer we would have started the next process. And I think Broadmoor was the next park that we were going to target, and work our way through every couple of months, just kind of keeping this to be a rolling process. Obviously, we've had to make some changes. I think as we see some successes potentially with our virtual comprehensive planning processes and some of the things that we're going to have to do to wrap up the Mohawk process, we can replicate and get those going again. But I think it had originally been our intent to be through this process in our other parks, by next summer, if not before then. So I think trying to get back on track and figure out how to do that will give us that sense. And I mean, really, we just spent some time brainstorming about a month ago with Confluence and saying, okay, so let's just look at acreage and size and things suggested in the park master plan for Mohawk. Outside of Streamway, it's really our largest park right now. And then let's try, if we say $3.5 million gets us what we vision there, then let's kind of step through the other, major parks. We've made really all of our investments in parks in Anderson at this point. So, a refresh of the tennis court, repair of the tennis courts, probably an upgrade to shelters here, but a new play structure at some point. But I think we tried, that's how we sort of worked ourselves into that $10 million number, was kind of working through each park and thinking about size and scale and what might be appropriate there. So now we just have to get out and talk to people and actually turn that into drawings similar to what you're seeing for Mohawk. But
and so Laura, along those same lines, maybe we could have some sort of asset inventory of our parks as to, improvements that have been made to various parks through the years. I know the master plan has, various elements and, what needs are there for the different elements of the park. But, I think it'd be interesting to look at all of our parks and see how much capital investment we've made in those through the years, so that we can, think about priorities. And I know that as we think about the next steps with parks outside of Mohawk, how do we prioritize those and competing interests, because we all have them. My last question, Penn, and it's more logistical, and I apologize for that. But in the Parks Master Plan, it references site furnishing guidelines. So having standards for all of our parks, you know, be it our benches, you know this language, I don't, but, you know, having the same benches at every park, you know, so I'm curious, when we get to that point in the process for Mohawk, really we'll be choosing looks and feels and guidelines and standards for all of our parks. And so I'm curious, you know, what that process will look like.
Yeah, that's interesting, and we've kind of spoken internally, and at least as a Park Recreation and Tree Commission, about that specifically. It was driven to create sort of economies of scale. So if you're replacing one bench, you could use that bench throughout any one of the 8 parks that we see a lot of traffic. And so that's kind of what drove that. I really foresee our parks having a unique identity, and rather than having the same bench from one park to the next park to the next, having similar benches within that one park. And then Broadmoor has its own similar bench. Waterworks has its own. Anderson has its own. So to answer your question, I don't believe we would need to commit to one bench if we were choosing the bench at Mohawk exclusively.
Thank you.
You bet.
Hey, Penn.
All right, any further questions? Oh yeah, Debbie, go ahead.
I'm going to follow up with you via email tomorrow morning. I've had some concerns raised, and I've got pictures. I've taken pictures throughout Broadmoor to address some concerns, not only where the environmental realm of greeneries has popped up, and we encourage that, but now I think there may be some issues with it, as well as loose concrete along the path. Anyway, I'm going to send you some pictures. And I don't know if you want me to copy Mark Radizer on it for the park board or just start with you. What's your preference?
I have no problems sharing with Mark. He and I love talking about these things.
Okay. I'll get that off first thing in the morning.
I appreciate that, Debbie. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Penn at this time? Seeing and hearing none, thank you, Penn.
Thanks.
And that will conclude our discussion items. We'll move into other, where we have department updates. Laura, are there any department updates for this evening? You're on mute.
The cleaning staff came in the middle to empty trash, so my apologies. A couple of quick things, and then Celia and I have a couple of more substantial things that we would like to cover under that. I just want to touch on, I know council members Thomas and Craig and I have been talking about kind of some enhancements to our monthly interim financial reports and some better reporting to the council about financial status. And we've been looking at that. I've been looking at that and thinking about that, looking at some other reports and examples that are available. The challenge is timing. And so what I would like to try on the 16th at our legislative meeting, what happens with us is we don't typically have the previous month closed by the time we get to our committee meeting. So the committee meeting doesn't align very nicely with us being able to present. So if I had presented and put something on tonight's agenda, we would be looking at July financials, which doesn't seem relevant enough to our conversation. So what I would propose is that you give us the chance, and so I will, as a part of my city administrators update at our legislative meetings each month. So by the time we get to that third Wednesday, we will have the month closed. I'll be able in 2 weeks to present you with the August financials. That I think allows me to do two things. One, we can then make that a part of the packet going forward, so we know it's always available, and if someone is interested, you all get it as a part of your packet. You can review it. If you have questions, it gives you that opportunity on in a public meeting on the record to ask a question. I can give a very brief highlight. If there's nothing really of significance to report, I can simply just reference that those reports are available. And then we'll also continue to post them where we do now in the interim financial report section on our website. So if that sounds acceptable to everyone, I think we're going to try that starting in a couple of weeks. And I've got some additional just sort of dashboard charts and graphs that will give that can perhaps help you get a quick feel for, you know, where we are financially. So wanted to give a quick update on that. Hodges planters, I know I've had some questions about Hodges planters. We had it, I think I reported last month, we had a great meeting with the working group. We brainstormed some options. We sent several options back to GBA, but they didn't get anything costed out for us in time for our meeting tonight. So we are continuing to work on that. As soon as we have a cost-effective solution, we will bring that back. I've communicated that. The working group knows kind of where we are, so still working on that. We sort of re-upped our Gateway conference calls. I know several of you were contacted by the media this week about an update on the status of the Gateway project, of which there really wasn't anything significant to report. But in the conversation on our conference call on Tuesday, I did indicate to Tom that I thought it was probably time for him to just come to a committee meeting or a council meeting and have the opportunity for you all to, you know, ask questions or hear a status update. Would you like that at, I don't know his availability yet, but would you like that at your legislative meeting in September, or would you like us to shoot for a October committee meeting?
I guess my question is, if he doesn't have any information to offer, are we just grilling him?
Well, several of you have indicated you would like for him to be in front of you, so that I don't know how to answer that, you know, that question. So I've seen Councilmember Thomas and Councilmember Boultinghouse in the chat feature have indicated October to potentially allow more time for updates. So we can plan to have him Zoom in with us at our October committee meeting. Does that seem reasonable?
When do you think we'd have more time? Is it too early to say if October committee meetings are already going to be 4 hours long? Because I think that Gateway conversation is going to be a longer one. So where does it make the most sense?
I don't think, I mean, we're scheduled to sort of go off cycle in October with our street asset inventory, stormwater, the racial equity conversations that have been creating these longer committee meetings. So I think October at first blush looks like an opportunity that could make some sense.
Okay.
The other thing, talking about street program work sessions, I had sent out a doodle poll. I resent that to some this morning just to kind of, we had sent out several potential dates to get calendared on continuing our discussions and spending some time in the street asset inventory. It looks like we had offered up the 23rd of September, the 30th of September, the 14th of October, and the 28th of October. It looks like there are a couple of you who are not available on Wednesday, the 23rd of September. So everybody seems to be available on the remaining 3 dates. I think that what I would recommend is let's definitely plan on the Wednesday, September 30th session. And I would just encourage everyone to hold the 14th and the 28th, because I imagine we're going to have lots to continue to talk about. And whether we end up talking about streets or stormwater, or whether we end up, that is a night that becomes a good night for our community conversation for step 3 in our kind of racial equity action plan. That with everybody's availability, if you'll just hold on to those, we'll get the specifics scheduled soon. We've had a couple of questions, both from council members and from members of the public, about potentially reopening our playgrounds. In our COVID kind of reopening matrix, we had targeted that for phase 4. We got to phase 3, rolled back to a lesser phase. We have only opened the playground in Anderson really on a very limited basis. We were doing some specific sanitizing and opening up some time for special needs populations. But we have had a request to open up our playgrounds. We are one of the few communities right now who do not have our playgrounds open to the public. we could certainly do that. The question then becomes, we don't have the staff or the equipment to keep them sanitized on a regular basis. Many of the communities that I think we're seeing are, if they're not able to sanitize, they're at least posting that is not occurring, so that patrons have the opportunity to make that decision on their own. And then the question becomes enforcement. I mean, I think the bigger issue as opposed to transmission is from the surfaces, excuse me, is enforcing gathering limits. So I did not want to make a decision about keeping playground equipment open, since we've made the decision you all have made it as the governing body. So I wanted to bring that back to you.
Yeah, Laura, what do we think our ability would be to enforce both, masks if people are within 6 feet, including of children over 5 in accordance with the mask order, and also, gathering size limits, that sort of thing. Do we feel like we have the capacity to do that, if not the sanitation?
Well, yes and no. I mean, on a complaint basis, the question is going to be, if it's masks, we won't be able to do anything other than to go out. I mean, our enforcement will be going out and reminding people that there's a mask order in place, right? So the question becomes really what degree of enforcement. So I would imagine we would handle it on a complaint basis, similar to what we did when kind of the stay-at-home orders first went into place. We had several calls at Rushton as people would gather, and you'd have 15 to 20 people up playing basketball, or something along those lines. Again, our enforcement ability is very limited.
Sure.
But that's kind of where we are.
I know for Mohawk, I've already heard and seen complaints about activity in connection with the permissible uses. So, for example, the sports leagues and how people are behaving around those leagues. So I was wondering, how prevalent is that? Are we already having problems with the uses we've allowed, or are we feeling pretty comfortable overall?
I don't know what Penn's take on that is. I feel like with respect to gathering limit, I mean, the most visible thing from my perspective is the spray ground. And granted, we've tried to manage that on an appointment basis, but I feel like that's been really effective, and people have been really respectful of that opportunity and are just grateful to have some of those amenities available to them. But I can't really speak. If others may be able to speak a little bit more to activities in some of the other parks that I don't see as often.
Sollie, and I remember you bringing that up to me specifically. So we reached out to our rental group out at Mohawk Park and followed up with them to make sure they've got a site supervisor on hand to review those standards with families. And they've committed to us that they're going to uphold that.
No, that's good news. I just kind of wondered in terms of scope overall, if we feel like, people are generally doing what they're supposed to do with the uses we have allowed, because that would make me feel more comfortable with opening up more uses if we felt like people were generally doing a good job so far.
Yeah, and I've not been out to our playgrounds when people have been on them, but I've been to neighboring playgrounds, and I imagine the citizens are pretty similar. There's a pretty strong consensus to keep your distance from other people when they're using the playground. And if children cross paths, you kind of see the parents get a little bit antsy and say, hey, Timmy or Susie, let's come over and play on this structure, and let them play on that structure. So you do see citizens working well together.
Penn, I have a question. The items, the playground items that were a safety hazard, have those been corrected?
Parts have been ordered, and we've gotten some of them corrected. So not all of them have been corrected to this point.
So is that an issue in terms of opening up the playgrounds?
Yes, so the playgrounds that still need those modifications would only have some use available.
Okay.
Quick comment. I've heard from multiple constituents who want to see the playgrounds open back up. And so I support us opening the playgrounds. I think, especially because we've had Anderson somewhat open, and how we've used the spray ground and all of the surrounding cities, including county parks, are open. So that's my 2 cents. I think if we have an issue or people aren't following, best practice, we can look at having to reclose them if necessary. Or if we have capacity to sanitize, say, even just 2 of them, or, I think if we can do whatever we can to make them as safe as we can, but recognize that we may not be able to do all that we wish we could.
If we are going to open up, I think we should post that they're not being sanitized or whatever we're doing, so people can make that choice.
I agree. I think we should post that as well as the distancing and mask requirements.
Do we have any dollars and potentially CARES Act reimbursable dollars to get hand sanitizer stations at our parks? At least the ones with the playgrounds?
Well, I don't know if they were on our wish list. I'd have to go back and look, but we're in the process of finding out probably at the end of this week how much of that allocation we'll have. So, and I don't know what, I'm assuming that would be an eligible item, but we can continue to.
I'm sorry, we can make the request. The challenge is actually ordering them because there's high demand right now.
Yeah. Okay, so I hear consensus that we will reopen, posting that the equipment is not sanitized, and posting, reminding people of distancing and mask wearing requirements. And if we have an issue, we'll bring it back and potentially close things back down. I think again I think we'll start to hear some things out of the state here in the next week and a half as we reach the 15th of September, when I believe the governor's ability to declare some of these things will expire. So there could be some other changes coming on the near horizon. Okay, 2 other things. One, I'll start and then kick it over to Celia, and then she and I will tag team on the second. So I think everyone is familiar that we've got the Rock Creek Channel project underway. We have been struggling for the better part of a year now to secure the necessary easement from Wendy's in order to construct the improvements on their property. We had made the decision to proceed through district court with eminent domain proceedings to condemn those easements. And we had the petitions filed pre-COVID, and then the district courts went virtual. We were working through that process, and we're scheduling hearings and a variety of different things. And then we hit a second snag, which has delayed kind of that whole process even further. So the tenant, Wendy's corporate owns the land. The tenant filed bankruptcy. We have not been able to get a stay from the bankruptcy judge in order to get back into district court to proceed with the condemnation. We promised the contractor that the easement would be available no later than June 15th, and here we are September 2nd, and we still can't deliver that easement to them. We finally were able last week to make some progress with the bankruptcy issue that would allow us to get back into district court with the eminent domain proceedings. But again, it is a factor of time, and the contractor is potentially going to have to, or subcontractor is potentially going to have to pull off of the site and then come back if we want to construct that portion. So we're really here. Celia can give you a little bit more detail about kind of what's going on with the project, but we're looking for some guidance about whether or not we potentially pay more to come back and finish that section of the wall or remove that section of the wall from the project. So Celia, with that, I will let you take it away.
I'll try to be quick on this one because I know it's getting late. So as Laura said, we're getting to the point that the longer that we wait on this Wendy's easement, we're at a risk for additional cost due to delays. So the contractor, we asked them a cost of, if we don't get the easement by the next couple weeks or mid-September, and what would the cost be? And they're estimating about $125,000 if we have to remob. And that's really due to the work sequence. So right now, Gunter is our contractor and they're responsible for the grading. So they grade the channel and they set the base and put the rock down. And then MSE, the wall contractor, comes in and lays the block. So right now, if you've been out there, they're really moving along, and they estimate to get the south side of the channel done within the next 2 weeks, up to the point where the channel bends, and then the wall gets really tall. I think it's about 24 feet. At that point, we need to put in some soil nail walls to support the wall. So when that contractor comes in on the 22nd, our MSE wall contractor has to stop work until that work is done, and then they have to jump on the north side of the channel. And before they can start on the north, Gunter has to do their grading. You don't want to do it too early, because when you have a big rain, at the beginning of the project, they did that and they had to redo it. But they really need to know whether we're going to have Wendy's or not. Ideally, we start at the bottom end of the channel and work the way up. And they can start at the edge, the western edge of Wendy's, if we're not going to build the wall, but they don't want to start there and then have to go back and fill it in later. That's going to cause, means and methods and works and delays. And so they're really asking us for this decision so that they can keep going, because if they can't start and get through there, MSC is going to get to the point where they run out of work to do and they're going to have to pull off the site. They've got a lot of expensive equipment and a number of laborers, and that will be the cost of them having to come back and remobilize, is about this $125,000. And like I said, that's an estimate and not set in stone, but it really makes us wonder, should we do the wall or not if Wendy's isn't willing to give us the easement. So we asked GBA to go ahead and rerun the hydraulic model, and they ran it to show what are the impacts if we don't do this project. And they determined that there would not be negative impacts to Wendy's. There wouldn't be flooding of the parking lot if we didn't build that portion of the wall. Also asked about the scouring and the erosion potential. And GBA's opinion is that once we build the wall, the velocity of the channel will go faster. So there will be potential for scouring, but because there's a thick shale ledge there, it may just have a little scouring on the toe and then it'll stabilize itself out. So they don't feel like there's a big concern for erosion in the future. We also talked about if there is a deduct to the wall, if we don't do Wendy's, we would have a deduct to our price. We don't know that exact number right now. We're still working with the contractor in case we don't get the easement. There's some costs such as the block. Now that if we don't use all the block, is there a restock fee? They had some engineering costs spread over the whole project. They had a bond for the entire project, so that we'd have to negotiate all that. So we can't give you a number tonight. We also have the contractor has raised an issue about additional excavation costs. They feel like they've got a lot more excavation than originally called for. And there's some provisions in the contract, that we're working through. So I don't want to give you a number tonight, but we are working towards that in case that is that if that's what the outcome is. But we're really looking for your input tonight on whether, if we don't receive the easements by a certain time period, are you open to deleting the wall on the Wendy's property for the project?
And I think that would be our staff recommendation.
Yes.
Quick question. I know that you were going to make one last ditch effort with Wendy's. What was the result of that last ditch effort?
Well, surprisingly, Pete Heaven reached out late yesterday afternoon and said, we need the easements signed in the next 48 hours or so, or we're not going to make the improvements to your property. We did hear back from Wendy's this afternoon. They've indicated they think they would be willing to sign the easements, but then they've raised the whole issue of the value of the easements and any compensation. And so we will talk with them again. The attorney was out of the office the balance of this afternoon, so we will talk with them again first thing in the morning, and see if we can make any progress on that. So there is the smallest glimmer of hope that we will get this and we will be able to move forward in a reasonable fashion and cancel the eminent domain proceedings. And that's what we've told them. You're not going to get the improvements. So we're dismissing the eminent domain proceedings. There's no money coming to, there's no compensation for this easement because we don't need the easement. We're just done. I think finally, maybe yesterday and today we got through about the value of those improvements, you know, to their property overall. But the trust factor in terms of them being able to respond quickly is obviously a little bit lacking, but we are trying. We did actually rouse them yesterday with that when we reached out. So.
All right. Any other comments or questions on this or ideas?
Well, I guess the question on the table is, I'm all for that last ditch effort, but if Wendy's is not going to cooperate, which they haven't, then I would suggest we move ahead and not do that portion of the channel in front of the property.
I would agree.
Yeah. I would say that we wait, as staff suggested, you know, until we have to make that call. But yeah, if we have to walk away from it, we just don't do that piece.
We have to make that, we're at that point. We have to make the call within the next,
now.
Yeah, we're there. We've got a little bit more time. We had a meeting with the contractors today that I think there's a willingness to be as flexible as they possibly can be. But we're there. We're within a week of having to pull the trigger definitively on that. So, okay. So we'll move forward on that. So Celia, then do you want to talk about our STP grant application? And then that, I promise it's the very last thing we have tonight.
Actually, I had one quick comment at the end too, but
oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, you want me to go ahead or? Trent?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as you know, the Johnson Drive Metcalf to Lamar project has been in our CIP and discussed over numerous years. We did remove it out of the 5-year CIP this year. Due to budget constraints, we had to delay Fox Ridge. So Fox Ridge was moved into that project's spot for 2023, but we still wanted to go ahead and apply for STP funds and see if we could get those funds, and then maybe we could change the CIP again next year, depending on what we had. So we went ahead and submitted the first phase, and we were actually surprised to receive a rating of highly aligned. So the next phase of the application is due this Friday, and there's a lot of information that goes into it. They've really changed their process, so it's a whole new application that we're working through. Well, when you add in contingency and inflation to 2023, the estimated cost of the project is $12 million. And the project quickly is replacing the deteriorated pavement, the curb and gutter, sidewalks, maybe widening some sidewalks, replacing them for ADA, installing a large stormwater interceptor underneath Johnson Drive to connect to the existing interceptor on the east side of Lamar, traffic signals, looking at safety considerations, street lights, etc. So we very conservatively estimated that we could receive maybe $2 million from STP and $2 million from CARS, and that would mean that we would need $8 million of city funding. And that's a real conservative estimate. I mean, it really just depends on how the other projects come in. And so we could receive more. We just don't know for sure until the final scoring. So after discussing internally and after the street preservation program discussion where we talked to you about the importance of residential streets, we're concerned about putting that large amount of money towards the project at this time. So at this time, we're recommending not submitting the phase 2 of our application and reapplying for STP funding for the next cycle, which would be 2025 to 2026. That would give us more time to really dig into our street preservation program, determine how we're going to fund arterials and residentials. And what we don't want to do is apply for funding, get a small portion of it, have to turn it back in and risk our reputation. So that's what we wanted to ask you for your input tonight on whether we should go ahead and not submit the application. And that is our recommendation at this time.
I know I sent you all some information late this afternoon, but I want to just go back to kind of where Celia started, and that is, as she was going to kind of the pre-planning meetings and the informational meetings on this application cycle through Mark, they have changed some of their processes, and they were very strong in communicating that if your project was not on this Mark 2050 plan, that the likelihood that it would score favorably through the grant application process was pretty low. And so our Johnson Drive project is not on that 2050 plan. And so we thought, well, we've made the commitment, we've anticipated we would apply, let's go ahead, and if nothing else, it will be a good exercise to sort of get the feedback and see, you know, where we might improve or where we might need to strengthen our grant application in the future. So either Celia is one heck of a grant writer, I think, yes, but I think we both sort of fell out of our chairs when we got notice back and said that we were, you know, highly favored or favorably rated or whatever the appropriate terminology is. So you have one of those, oh no moments. Now, you know, now kind of what do we do? And in the interim period is when we've had kind of this first look at the street asset inventory and you all's conversations around really prioritizing residential streets. So I always hate to reject the potential for someone else's money. But I feel like we aren't able to really make the most informed decision around this project at this point in time.
And I did talk to Mark's staff members today and talk to them about the potential if we did, you know, not submit, you know, what are our chances? And of course they can't predict where the federal funding will be, but they feel like, you know, I mean, they may change the application a little bit, but they feel like we would still have good chances if we resubmitted in 2025. I hate to wait that long, but, you know, just trying to prioritize all of our city needs. The other option would be to really take a look at the project. And I'm not saying that the stormwater interceptor isn't the right thing to do. It was decided, you know, and a big study was done, but I haven't looked at it. Is there any way that we can do something different? Because that's a large portion of the project. So maybe just getting the chance to take a look at some of those in more detail.
And just as a point of context, so the $10.8 million Johnson Drive rehabilitation project that we did in 2014, we had about $4.5 million of city, this actual city dollars in that, because we were able to get SMAC funding, STP funding, and CARS funding. And I think we actually had another grant that got applied to that. So so the stretch to an $8 million ask for us is a big reach on any project.
I think that our streets really need help. And I think that prioritizing the streets at this point in time is something we need to do. And I believe that we need to drive the agenda rather than it being driven by grants at this point in time. And so that's my feeling. I think that we should go ahead and pull it and maybe apply for it later and go ahead and try to get a handle on our residential street program.
Other thoughts?
I agree with Ken.
We've got from Hillary in the chat another agreement with Penn.
Okay.
So just to clarify, Ken, you're wanting to move forward without the grants? Is that what I heard right?
No, no,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no.
Okay.
No,
'Cause I was like,
I'm
wait.
not. No, my recommendation is that we prioritize the residential streets. And if since that is such a large price on Johnson Drive, that we postpone that to 2025, if that's 2025, 26, and take another look at things and go ahead and continue on our street priority, our street programs with residential streets.
Okay, I agree with that.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? If not, we'll plan to not follow through. Celia just got a pass for the rest of the week. She can go work on the Wendy's easement, right?
Yeah, I have it all ready for 2025 now. So
that's right. Well, and again, I just have, I appreciate the feedback. I also just have to really take a moment to say thank you to both Penn and Celia, who have really, in the short time that they've both been here, heard the council's message, and I think have been really focused on pursuing grant opportunities. That's great. It's a great position to be in. So, all right, thank you for that feedback. And I think that is all we have for you tonight.
All right, I do think we had one item from Trent that he wanted to share with the council.
Yeah, 30 seconds here. Two things. So as a result of our voter turnout resolution we passed earlier this year, the mayor has designated me as kind of the team lead for mission on working with Mainstream Coalition's voter to voter tool. And that's live. And we have a team out there. And so I'll be sending out instructions via email to everybody this week on how to join our team. And the second thing was Mainstream is doing a kickoff of this tool September 10th from 4:30 to 5:30. And I'll send out info to that too. But it'd be cool if everybody could join. You can sign up, through my email, and hopefully the instructions are clear enough. And we can start getting credit and really working on, reaching out to our friends and coworkers and family to make sure that they're going to vote. That's it.
Sollie, I have just an information piece.
Yes, just one second. We also have an announcement in the chat, and I'll turn back to you, Kim. But I have one follow-up question for Trent. Trent, I think there is the ability to do a demo. If council members were confused about the tool, could they reach out to you to get a demo from you one-on-one?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, perfect. And then the city announcement in the chat was that the Lamar Avenue bike lane reveal and group ride that our Sustainability Commission is helping out with will be September 9th from 5:30 to 7:30. And with that, Ken.
Yes, my information that I have is that we've worked with KDOT, and they have removed 6 dead trees along the parkway on Shawnee Mission Parkway between Lamar and Woodson. And they have one large elm that is still there that they're going to take out in the coming week, and that will remove all of the dead trees in that stretch of the parkway.
Great.
Good work. All right, any other items? Seeing and hearing none, that concludes our CDC meeting at 10:15 p.m.
Thank you all.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.